So I'm finally gonna watch Backbeat.
You got me on my knees.
Public executions, mass arrests, and torture.
What everyone in those meetings was talking about was nothing less than the African Holocaust.
It lights up a biblical famine, is the closest thing to hell on earth.
Most damningly, Keating reported that Geldof was warned repeatedly.
Families of the executed were often forced to reimburse the government for the bullets used to kill their loved ones, adding a whole new level.
I need a Beatles video. I really need a Beatles video. I said I was going to do this 8 months ago, but, you know, it's too late. Hi, I'm Lars, and this is my land. In my land, I get to do pretty much whatever I want. So today, we're going to talk about the Beatles biopic, Backbeat, and you're going to listen, because it's my land. Welcome to Annoying Memos Land. Beepity beep, beepity beep, beep. If you're new here, I talk about the Beatles, but I am also into TV and movies. I'll get back to it, whatever. I have been known to drop a 7-hour video on the TV show Lost, and if I don't mention it in every video I do, I'm gonna be the... Wait a second. Okay, this one doesn't really make sense. This plays to a very specific audience. Oh, I got this wrong. What I was trying to say was I would be the first Yokozuna to be beaten by a Mega Shira 15. And once again, this plays to a very specific audience. If you're into sumo, we're friends. What that really means is I would get my ass kicked by someone who's supposed to be way worse than me. Go Kota Shoho, you deserve it. I always root for the underdog.
That is, unfortunately, a record, not one you want.
Sorry. Please like, subscribe, comment if you're nasty. And if you're a big Beatles fan, if you are a big Lars-Land fan and you want all of the music, all of the interviews, all the stuff that content daddy doesn't let me have here, go check out my Patreon, patreon.com/Lars-Land, get your gold passport, and all of the insanity is open to you. See that, Simba? That's the shadowy place. You've got to pay to get there. Anyway, so like, subscribe, comment if you're nasty. Now let's get back to my land.
What do you say?
You said if I could do it all again, I'll be up there shaking me bum doing blue suede shoes. It's all dick. That's what he said.
By the way, the thing that's breaking my brain right now is a Live Aid video. I've been working on it, and I'm very clear about how my Beatles videos, although I am a journalist by trade or whatever, are not journalism. They're a fan with a journalistic background. My Live Aid video is turning in very quickly into like hardcore journalism, and it is breaking my brain. So I had to do something. I had to do something quick, or else I was gonna. Hey, I have to warn you, like later on in this video, we're gonna be talking about gay. Speculating on, not any more than John Lennon speculated on his own sexuality himself, but we're going to talk about gay. And if you have an issue with gay, I'm so sorry, but gay. Occasionally, the world, gay. We'll be talking about that. Sweeping warning of gay. Backbeat is a 1994 drama film directed by Ian Softly. The focus on the film surrounds the Beatles' time in Hamburg in the early 1960s, particularly the relationship between Stuart Sutcliffe and John Lennon, and then Sutcliffe's relationship with Astrid Kircher and his untimely death. I wrote, quick explain the Hamburg thing. Also, I took like 4 years of German, and so sometimes I say Hamburg, and I'm sorry. It's because I haven't done it for so long that I say it wrong both ways. It's stupid. Anyway, long story short, I said repeatedly throughout this video that this is supposed to be a low effort video. And in comparison to what I do, this is actually pretty low effort, but it wasn't, it was too low. So I said things, but I was lying.
And he's coming back with a fucking 2.5 hour video. Please at least like make a Cliff Notes version.
This is Lars's low effort categorical failure video. To combat Live Aid fatigue. Important disclaimer, because I love disclaimers, but this one is important. Yesterday, I started saying in my head, big dog, a lot. Be like, oh, big dog, I don't know what happened. So that's gonna come along. We're gonna, if it sticks in, I think it's funny. I have no reason to stop. Big dog is a thing now, at least for today. I haven't slept in 2 days. It's not my fault. I've been trying. I've always struggled with insomnia. It's a whole thing. I'm trying. You can tell I'm manic. I know. I'm trying to reel it in. Chapter 1. I'm going to read specifically and mostly from Bob Spitz's book, The Beatles, and talk about kind of the inception. Like I said, Backbeat's a movie about the Hamburg era. So I'm going to read from Bob Spitz's book. The reason why I chose everything from his book, and I will have some other things kind of like sprinkled in, is because out of all of the sources that I did cross-examine or have already known about or were just kind of able to check into or pulled up for this, they all check out. And in spite of other authors talking about a lot of revelatory changes in Stu and the relationship with Stu's importance in the band and all kinds of stuff, I decided not to look at those books. 99999 fitting. Check out my Lewis and Lied video if you haven't yet. Okay. Also, just a little touch, because unfortunately, and I've been told that I need therapy, and yes, I do, but I've also been told that I'm obsessed with Mark Lewison right now and talking shit about him. And, you know, yes, right now, but I also am obsessed with talking shit about Philip Norman, Albert Goldman, not super keen on Peter Brown and Stephen Gaines's work. I'll stop caring when they stop lying. I'll stop caring when they stop lying. I'll stop caring when they stop. I'm not super keen on a lot of authors, but do I own them and read them? Oh God, yeah. Yeah, I do, because all of these things influence the narrative. As salacious as some of these things are, especially Goldman, you read it and I mean, you're never going to really hear me say a good thing about it except for, wow, that was entertaining fiction. I've already mentioned him twice. Okay. But what they don't do is what you'll learn about if you watch my Lewis and Lied video, because if I do this, we're going to be gone. And like I said, I'm trying not to ramble. Chapter 2. I'm going to talk about Backbeat the movie, just the background, production, little facty facts, reviews, reception, what the Beatles themselves and the people involved in that era of the Beatles in Hamburg thought about it. Accuracy sort of goes there, sort of not. Then Chapter 3 is a Content Daddy approved watch through / narration. Usually I have to do a little story time over what the movie is and then kind of cut in footage. It's the way that I did the Lost video, and honestly it's what I like to call my flippy edits, and I like it a lot. However, I thought that I was particularly funny, and you know, it was my first night of not sleeping. Unfortunately, the big dog thing hadn't started yet, but I did call Paul flat-chested twice. So, I mean, why would I deprive you, Lars-Landians, of that? I would never. During this, and I haven't decided, so it's going to be whatever works better. I might cut in during the movie part with possible stories and anecdotes from the anthology book, and if we're lucky, the anthology documentary. If not, then I might cut it in not Mark Spitz's book time, because it just kind of depends on what I like better, essentially. Because we have to do Content Daddy version on YouTube, you got to know that the full watch is available for gold passport holders. What I want to say, 4 + 4 = 8. Okay? This is as low effort as we can go these days. It's just that it's not my fault that I care. And if the Beatles had less information, I could do less. Okay? Okay, now I'm going to read from not Mark Spitz's book. I should probably keep this nearby.
So take all this.
A central theme to Backbeat and just kind of conversation surrounding Stuart Sutcliffe and John Lennon is John's relationship to sexuality and how he kind of forces certain friends, he gets obsessed with certain friends and he wants them around, and how is that sexually related to John? Is there a romantic background? What does that mean about John's friendships and relationships? Fuck it. Platinum record this, viral record that. I can't do low effort, so I'm reading all this shit. Okay. Listen, if some of the stuff that I've said gets a little repetitive because I've recorded this over several days, I've already put the Patreon version up. I'm reading this out of pure defensiveness and concern for getting yelled at, essentially. I typically come with receipts and I just really didn't for this video, so I wanted to just read this, and then if there are issues with what I'm talking about, because I'm talking about things that are known about or speculated about with John and backed up kind of by John and things that he said, I would rather the issues be brought up with the source material, because I'm drawing my opinions talking about being a bisexual person and how difficult that can be when you're young and you don't know how to interact with your friends. These are things that I will be talking about later in the video. I'm drawing those assertions in that conversation based on what I know about John. The issues that I'm talking about are my experiences, and then this is why I think that we could be talking about this. Essentially, take it up with the sources, not me, because you can't take away my experience as a bisexual person. That part's real as hell. So these are things that are known about John, believed about John, speculated about John. You can't hide from them. You can't run from them. So here's the conversation. This is from Bryant Bennett. He was a part of the Shadows. He says, Cynthia was talking to my wife, Margaret, and asking her about how she managed being left at home, blah, blah, blah. A lot of alcohol was consumed and things began to get really loud. When differences of opinions are mixed with booze, it almost always ends badly. In those days, if you called someone a poof or a queer, you were usually asking for trouble. I think someone called John a queer and that was it. Whoever it was got hit hard and carried out. So this is the conversation regarding Bob Wooler. And if you want more information about the Bob Wooler situation, I suggest you check out my Beatles and domestic violence video. Bob Wooler jokingly inquired after John and Brian's recent honeymoon. He was by no means the only one to have done so, but for John, it was the proverbial last straw. He lost control, leapt at his tormentor, and laid into him so viciously that Wooler had to be rushed to the hospital. Unfortunately for John, the story made the local rags and reached Fleet Street the day after. His remorseful telegram to the DJ can't have done much to heal the wounds. 8 years later, in 1971, he addressed the subject during an interview. This time I'm just going to read the words. I want everyone to remember that I'm just reading from, and we can all, hi, I'm reading about John Lennon. You're fine, what's up? I don't care. Here, let me show the people. It's a picture of Jack being cute. Is he looking at birds? Oh, he is looking at birds. Thank you. 8 years later, in 1971, he addressed the subject in an interview. Obviously, I must have been so frightened of the fag in me to get so angry. You know, when you're 21 and you want to be a man and all that. If somebody said it now, I wouldn't give a shit. So I was beating the shit out of him and hitting him with a big stick, too. And it was the first time I thought, I can kill this guy. I just saw it, like on a screen, that if I hit him once more, that was going to be it. John's friend Pete Shawton, as was his wont, went full throttle with his own remembrance of sins past. According to Pete, this is in Pete's book, John Lennon and My Life by him and Nicholas Schaffner. He called on his pal at Mindip's post-vacation and kind of asked him like, hey, what's going on with you and Brian? John was really frustrated, so he goes on to say, hey, Brian kept pestering me and pestering me and pestering me, and I said, fine, stick it up my ass. At which point, Epi had recoiled, sputtering that he didn't do that kind of thing. John was bemused and intrigued enough to ask what Brian did like. So I let him toss me off, shrugged John. Well, so what? Pete responded. What's the big fucking deal then? Because it's really not that big of a deal. You know, God forbid a man jack off his friends. The pair agreed that Brian was suffering enough as it was on account of the routine batterings he received from Liverpool dockers, which was exactly the kind of after-hours rest and relaxation that Brian went looking for, because refined, cultured Epstein's sexual preference was, as they say, a bit of rough. John had indulged him on that one occasion because he felt sorry for him. Pete empathized and sympathized. They left it at that. One occasion. Paul Gambaccini Gambaccini, we're not really sure on this pronunciation right here, offered further information during our John-related conversations. What is your take on John's holiday with Brian Epstein? The celebrated BBC broadcaster and professor of pop asked. They obviously had a relationship, I replied. You think? Do you have a quote on that? Not from John. Well, I can tell you, the person to whom John Lennon spoke about that is John Reed, the former manager of Elton John. John Reed told me personally what John Lennon had said about it. I'm going to tell you what he said, but I don't want you to put it in the book unless John Reed gives you permission. So this is a little bit of he said, she said, but let's go. I will ask him, I said. Okay, John Reed said that when we were in Boston with Elton and John in 1974, he couldn't resist asking John whether the rumors about him and Epstein were true. This was in response to John having said to Reed, "You're the most intimidating man I've met since Brian Epstein." And so John Reed, never knowingly one to miss an opportunity, said, "Did you have sex with Brian?" And John said, "Twice. Once to see what it was like and once to make sure I didn't like it." All these years, by the way, I have not wanted to be the guy who declared John Lennon and Brian Epstein had sex. You can appreciate how I feel about this. Do we want the historical record to be accurate, or does John have a right to privacy? And would it upset Cynthia, by now deceased, or Julian? I don't mind about Yoko. She'd probably think it was a great idea. Bisexuality. Woo. Simon Napier Bell said that both Epstein and John told him that they did it in Spain. I said, I'm not the only one. Good, replied Paul. But then there was John's liaisons with David Bowie, which David himself told me about. According to him, it happened on several occasions. He didn't go into detail, nor did I press him, but he was perfectly open about it. About Mick Jagger too, I told Paul. I feel sort of left out, said Paul. Me too. Yes, John Reed gave me permission. Brian Epstein had no reason to lie, points out Simon Napier Bell. It makes sense. If John was gay, he needed to get on and try it. And as it turned out, he wasn't. John tried things out. He didn't shy away from experiences, anything at all. Whatever it was, a new drug, a new religious idea, John was a leader in all things they did that were new and experimental. Was Brian in love with John? I don't know. What I know is that Brian was obsessed with the zest of Beatles. He adored that camaraderie that he could never be a part of, that whole concept of being included. That's what Brian fell in love with. He understood it. He sold it to the public, and he marketed it brilliantly. That's what the success of the Beatles was all about. There's hardly a man on the planet who hasn't tried another man at some time or another, especially the ones who insist that they haven't. John Lennon didn't go to public school where everyone was at it, so this was about him trying something he'd never tried before. He obviously respected Brian, and Brian loved what the Beatles were, so there was mutual admiration, which can turn very easily into lusts between two men, especially entertainment industry types who have gone out, had a few drinks, and found themselves alone together. What I don't understand is why people have made such a big deal out of it for all these years. It's no different from trying Japanese food. Try it, you might like it. Inquisitive, that was John. Why wouldn't he try it? So if it gets repetitive, that's where we're pulling from. That's one of many sources that I've read about regarding this, and none of those are actual quotes from John, but there are plenty. The issue is that there is a large subset of Beatle fans, older Beatle fans, men mostly, but also women, who just freak out, either head in sand or venomous angry comments when there is any sort of conversation regarding John's sexuality. It would be inappropriate for me to assign labels to John's sexuality, but John assigned labels or had conversations surrounding his sexuality, which could be jokes, but I only have to say that because it makes you, imaginary commenter, more comfortable, right? It fits the worldview that already exists. There are things to understand about sexuality, and the nuance that I think this particular crowd doesn't get is that sexual feeling or inkling does not necessarily equal romantic attraction, does not necessarily equal wanting a relationship. You may be more interested in relationships with one gender and only sex with the other gender. You may be a little attracted to men sometimes, but mostly attracted to women. And all of these things are normal. Literally, sexuality is a spectrum. When homosexuality was illegal and exploring those things was beyond nuanced, it's just fully taboo. You're not having these conversations regarding the shades of gray. It is pretty black and white, but I wanted to discuss this because I needed to address directly that older set, it's almost all older set of fans, if you're here, and the pure rage that I typically have experienced from that group of people when I even remotely touch this topic, or if anyone remotely touches this topic. I promise you, now these are names of people that have been in my comment section kindly, so this isn't about you guys, but I promise you, Susan, Jim, you guys are gonna be okay. You're gonna be fine. You guys are still straight. Now we're gonna talk about gay, because sometimes the world gay. When it comes to John Lennon's sexuality, we're gonna get upset. You ready? He's all but said he was bisexual. He's talked about it so many times. And no, this isn't the video for that because I haven't done the research and this is supposed to be a low effort video. But there's so many times he said, like, I was going to marry a rich woman or man. That's one that's just off the top of my head. I think it bothers us a whole lot more than it would ever bother John. Sexuality seems to be pretty fluid for John. And I like Lesley-Ann Jones' John book. I think it's good. And she just talks about his sexuality, rumors surrounding it, relationships with Bowie and other people, just like straight on. Let's say that John did have gay sex. Let's say that he did. He had so much gay sex with so many gay people and straight people. Because you can have sex with all kinds of people. And, you know, testing it out, having some fun. Maybe you guys had a couple cocktail wieners and you thought, what about this in my butt, right? I should probably tell my mom not to watch this one.
Hello?
Hey, it's just for...
Let's see.
You're good.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm filming. I just wanted to say this video I'm putting up, this is another one you can't watch.
I like the ones where you give me a heads up. Sometimes I just watch them, and if it gets, I haven't seen anyone for a long time.
Don't watch this one.
Sorry.
There's a
It's okay. I've been watching all this crud in the news about the Jeffrey Epstein. Whatever you're watching or listening to, it's not as bad as what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. And he got really pissed. And, you know, he's just awful, you know.
Right, yeah. All right, so where were we? Let's say that John had so much sex with all kinds of people. So what? like does it change? It shouldn't change really anything. If anything, it should be even more inspiring. Sexuality is a fluid thing, and I hope that everyone watching here feels supported enough to be able to like lay with and fall in love with whoever they find hot and amazing. The closet is an awful place to die. I think John wouldn't get offended about us speculating about his sexuality, but he probably would. That's just my personal opinion after reading, I don't know, about 100 books on the Beatles. 112, bitch, I just counted. And I own about 140 something now. You know, not all on John, obviously, but on the Beatles. I just think, you know, homie, it ain't that deep. Backbeat is centered on sexuality and how John felt about his friendships. One thing that we do know, there's no speculation for this, is that John was an extremely jealous person. Friends, relationships, success, anything. And he wanted attention all the time from the person he wanted attention from right at that moment. One of the things that John said, he was jealous that Yoko was in someone else's womb. He felt like she should have been in his womb. He was upset that she'd been inside someone else. He felt as if that was, you know, unfair or something. I don't want to do this, but I regret that Yoko wasn't my child. I don't like the idea of her being born in somebody else's womb. That's one of my great jealousies. It's a drag that she was in somebody else's womb, but I can't do anything about it. That's to the New Musical Express in 1969. John really wanted acclaim on the people he loved, and he would get upset if he couldn't beck and call them. That part, romantic or not, is not to be disputed because that is said by John himself and everyone around him. I know we're gonna get some stuff. I just don't understand why it would matter, because we know Bowie's bisexual. We know about all of these huge and amazing, Elton John's gay. They're gay icons across the board of all age ranges. It doesn't really matter to me. It's more that it's sad that it's something that would be a problem, or that if John wanted to express it more openly than he did, and he was pretty like loosey-goosey about it, that he felt he couldn't. Those are the things that I think are sad. And what I also think is sad is that I know I'm going to get so many positive comments about this video, because people will blow smoke up my ass and tell me that I'm amazing when I do nothing. But people love to love the Beatles, and so they love other Beatle lovers, right? But I know that I'm going to get someone who's mad that I said John Lennon was probably bisexual, or at least he was a little curious. So what? Who cares? But someone's going to say, you're trying to... I keep looking at myself in the monitor. Sorry, I just think I'm so pretty. People care too much, I think. I wanted to kind of go back and read, because there's some stuff that Miss Pauline said. Man, she's fun. She's fun. She's fucking crazy. But I did want to say, she just said a couple of things that I thought was fun. Did you say, or did someone else say, that you believe John and your brother engaged in a homosexual relationship? How did you arrive at that conclusion? Did Stuart say something to you? Pauline says, the press had a field day with all this, and I'm sure you know all that from the internet. He says, actually, I don't. I saw just a little on it. And she says, and she loves to call people honey. She says, oh, honey, I don't have a lot more to say about this beyond what I've said in my book, and I haven't read her book. Now, I was not the original source of that, okay? John was the original source, according to other well-known writers or publicists or inner circle entourage. So I'm not the originator of that. I have not confirmed that in any way. I simply say I'm a very seasoned psychotherapist, and given that they had a hugely intimate relationship, and also as very young men became involved in a hugely decadent world then at the time, they could have explored something like that together. Who knows? I personally don't know, but I can see that they might have done, or they might have not done. According to the written material out there, John is the person who originated the story, so I really just comment on it. You know what Broken clock, girl, I agree with you. So he says, I never heard about John and Stuart before. I have heard rumors about John and Brian Epstein. And she says, well, there's even new information on that these days. It would seem that there's more evidence to the story that it did happen than that it didn't, but who cares? The story didn't generate from me. I don't care personally. They were not homosexually inclined in any way. They loved women too much. It doesn't matter to me if they did. I could care less, but I'm not the source of that. You know, that's kind of an old-fashioned thinking where it's like, you know, it doesn't matter. They could have loved both. They could have liked women 90% of the time, or 10% men. Like, sexuality, I cannot stress this enough, is a spectrum. It seriously just doesn't matter that much.
Oh, dick.
Oh, baby, love your way. Every day, yeah. I wanna give you a night all day, every day, yeah. Okay. Yeah, but you're the one who's insisting on hanging out while I'm editing, so I'm the one who's insisting on holding you like this. You see what I'm saying? It's a compromise. I'm going to pull from the digital version, but I tell you guys, I spent up until 5 a.m. last night, wind up doing ugly highlighting, which is shameful, but you know, here we are. I'm going to talk about what's on screen. It will kind of be a summary at times, and there's going to be big parts that are going on in between this that it's like, wow, Lars really just skipped over that. Yeah, because we're talking specifically what is kind of germane to the Backbeat story, with a few like added in things that I just wanted to do. You can always feel free to pause, read on screen, all that stuff. Sources linked below. Once again, this is The Beatles by Bob Spitz, not Mark Spitz. Okay. Because of laziness or whatever, I don't know, I actually started reading from where Stu was already in The Beatles. TLDR, I guess if we're just like starting from the base, Stuart Sutcliffe was one of John Lennon's closest friends. They met in art school, and John wanted to spend as much time with Stu as possible, which is just something John Lennon likes to do with his friends.
We were all slightly jealous of John's friendship.
He was a little bit, he wanted to sit next to him on a bus and stuff, like he's the older fellow, it's just the way it was. Now, so when Stuart came in, it was a little bit of he was sort of taking a little bit of that position away from us. We tried to take a little bit of a back seat.
And he said, hey, that painting that you have, you should sell it. Then he takes the money from the sale. John Lennon convinces him to get a bass. You know what Stuart Sutcliffe had never played before? Was not musically inclined, a bass or anything. He was an artist, a painter, but he was good looking and he had the vibe, and John wanted him right there all the time, so he joined the Beatles. If it looks like this, it is from the anthology Beatles book. Okay? If it's one of these things, it's from the anthology Beatles book. Cool. Stuart joins the band, and George says Stuart was in the band now. He wasn't really a very good musician. In fact, he wasn't a musician at all until we talked him into buying a bass. We taught him how to play 12 bars like 30 Days by Chuck Berry. That was the first thing he ever learned. He picked up a few things and he practiced a bit until he could get through a couple of other tunes as well. It was a bit ropey, but it didn't matter at that time because he looked so cool. We never had many gigs in Liverpool before we went to Hamburg anyway. John says, we had a stand-in drummer for the day, talking about some specific performance, he said, and Stu couldn't play bass, so he had to turn his back. Paul says, we had to tell Stuart to turn the other way, do a Moody, do a big Elvis pose. If anyone had been taking notice, they would have seen that we were all in A. Stu would be in another key, but he soon caught up and we passed the audition to go on tour, and that's kind of where we're starting. We're around that time and the Beatles are trying to get bookings. This might seem random right now, but it definitely becomes germane to the story later. Is this the second time I said germane? I don't want to talk about it. After one show, awakened by a disturbance in the middle of the night, Pauline Sutcliffe, that's his sister, crept nervously into the bathroom where she found her mother, Millie, laboring over Stuart's scrawny body stretched out awkwardly in the tub. He was injured, recalled Pauline, and we'll hear more about Pauline later, okay? Who stood speechless in the doorframe. He said he'd been beaten up. Well, you know how rough these clubs are. There's a lot of jealousy, the implication being that it was some girl's boyfriend. He'd been kicked, badly beaten. He had bruising on his face. Fortunately, there were no broken bones. Around this time, the Beatles get a booking from their manager, Alan Williams, to take a residency in Hamburg, which is something that was going on with a lot of Liverpudlian bands at this time. They're taking the boys over for a couple of months at a time. You're lodging in these clubs and you're playing to them for extensive hours all the time and for measly pay. The Beatles start out in the St. Pauli district, which is a pretty crazy area of Hamburg, at the Indra, which was a strip joint, nothing more than a small and tatty lounge with red flock wallpaper and heavy drapes. If ever a stage designer tried to create a set for depravity, this is it. St. Pauli rushed in on them from every direction. It resembled a carnival midway, only gaudier and more vulgar.
Everything else was such a buzz, being right in the middle of the naughtiest city in the world at 17 years old. It was kind of exciting.
Oh, I should mention that this residency, there was some convincing to do with the parents. The parents were not exactly thrilled, including Mimi, Aunt Mimi, which is parent, about the boys going, especially Stuart, because he dropped out, or at least took a sabbatical from school to come and play here, and his mom was just absolutely mortified. But, Jim Mack comes around, Mimi comes around, and with a lot of help from Williams, Sutcliffe comes around, and Louise Harrison comes around. Issue with that is that George Harrison is 17. When it comes to work permits and curfews, 17-year-olds can't be doing what the Liverpudlian bands taking Hamburg residencies need to be doing. So George is 18. Okay, so it's a little risky. They're doing a little lying. But admittedly, George looks like he's 12 at best. One of my favorite things that I saw on Tumblr one time was like, Louise Harrison saw her child, a shivering chihuahua, and said, yeah, no, that'll be fine. The Indra Club is pretty ratty, okay? The Grosse Freiheit and the Herbertstrasse formed the city's infamous Mile of Sin, and it was there, along with the intersecting Reeperbahn, where the men flocked to behave as they might at a Roman orgy. It was an anything goes kind of place, says Adrian Barber, who turned up there later as a member of the Big Three. There were girls prowling the streets, posing naked in the windows, leaning against cars, pretty women all over the place, sex workers working. There's music blaring from every door, drunken sailors stumbling along the sidewalks, lofting steins of beer. And beer is affordable. in Germany. The Kaiserkeller on the corner of Schmuckstrasse was everything they imagined it would be. That's the club, Williams shouted, pulling up to the curb outside a squat building on the Grosse Freiheit. The Kaiserkeller on the corner of Schmuckstrasse was everything they imagined it would be. The club was bigger, brighter, louder, and groovier than anything they had seen before. The decor alone left them practically speechless. Bruno Kochschmeider is the owner of this club, but he owns another club, okay? And he sees the boys wowed and awed at the Kaiserkeller, and he's like, don't get too excited. So they take them quickly to the Indra. It was depressing by comparison. We were crestfallen when we saw it, said Pete Best. It was a lounge, a girly lounge, and deader than dead. A few bleary-eyed tourists sat glumly sipping beers. A girly lounge meaning a strip club. So they would be playing music while the girls stripped. The Beatles knew how to play a set, but they didn't have a ton of material. Coming in, this is a lot of pressure because they have to work for several hours on end. They have to work 4.5 hours each night, 6 hours on the weekend. It's a lot of work. And later on, it will go up to about 12. They had no act to speak of, knew almost nothing of stagecraft, and as musicians, they weren't terribly engaging. That's, I think, sort of up to interpretation. Stewart still struggled woefully to follow the melody lines, on top of which they'd had no time to work Pete into the band. The Beatles had material, they knew lots of music, but somehow this music, this rock and roll music, didn't really click with the crowd, and Kochschmeider was super pissed. He was like, you guys suck. You guys can play songs, but the crowd hates you. You guys are far too deadpan. You just stand there. Mac Shao, make a show. Mac Shao, come on, Mac Shao. The boys think that Mac Shao is very funny. It's also Mac Shao, but that's the way that they talk about it now, but it's Mac Shao. So they think it's very funny, and John just can't stop laughing about it. He starts duck walking like Chuck Berry and dropping into a split, which Williams, who didn't realize John was taking the mickey out of him, cheered on the antics. That's it, make a show. Kochschmeider too took up the chant, barking at the band in a kind of quasi-militaristic chant. Mac Shao. And the Beatles thought it was a scream, a German shouting Mac Shao. So the entire band gets really into this. They like John's horseplay. Paul starts raising his guitar and fencing with John, and he repeats the gesture until John responds in kind, and they are just stamping up, slowing down, messing around, and George eventually chimes in. Pete's doing the best that he can back there, just like, okay, I can't play with you guys. But Stewart, though saddled with the bass, contorted his body as though he were dodging bullets. He is inventing the Matrix. We have so much to thank him for. A cyclone of rhythmic unrest swept across the Indra's stage, synced to Pete's ferocious beat. It was the breakthrough the band had needed, and immediately they began to work these outbursts into the act.
I think that's where we found our style. We developed our style because of this. Fellow, he used to say, you've got to make a show for the people. He used to come up every night shouting, Mac Shao. So we used to Mac Shao, and John used to dance around like a gorilla, and we'd all, knock our heads together and things like that.
People start to want to see these crazy Beatles. They're like, who are these Brits playing at the Indra and this little trash venue and going absolutely bonkers? I love this. A Hamburg teenager who spent his weekends in St. Pauli found it, quote, possible to pass the whole night going from the Kaiserkeller to the Indra without the need for other entertainment. There was no place else in the district that offered such an exciting selection of music, and it was nonstop. The scene demanded it. They had to be on. It's hard enough to play 4.5 hours or so of music every night, but stamping around, duck walking, fencing with your guitars seems like it's kind of exhausting. Not to mention that the lodging left a lot to be desired, okay? Their rooms and a quarter behind a screen had fared no better. Filthy, dirty, and disgusting cubicles without windows or proper beds. John, Stewart, and George shared a cell fitted with a camp bed and sofa. Farther down the hall, past the urinal and just off the fire exit, Paul and Pete had adjoining rooms, the black holes of Calcutta, as they called them, without any lights, to say nothing of facilities or heat.
The group in residency came around to see how the groups were living, and they were really shocked because they remembered like one of us had a Union Jack over us to keep warm.
They were sleeping for a while in the back of the club, and I'll never forget when we arrived. It was just like, come
of old settees and flags, Union Jacks, like they were your sheets.
When we're talking about these living conditions, Paul says, we lived backstage in the Bambikino next to the toilets and you could always smell them. The room had been an old storeroom and there were just concrete walls and nothing else. No heat, no wallpaper, not a lick of paint, and 2 sets of bunk beds, like little camp beds and not very many covers. We were frozen. John says, we were put in this pigsty, like a toilet it was, in a cinema, a rundown of sort of a flea pit. We were living in a toilet, like right next to the ladies' toilet. We would go to bed late and be woken up next day by the sound of the cinema show, and we tried to get into the ladies first, which was the cleanest of the cinema's lavatories, but fat old German women would push past us. We'd wake up in the morning and there would be old German fraus pissing next door. That was where we washed. That was our bathroom. It was a bit of a shock in a way. George says, I never used to shower. There was a wash basin in the lavatory at the Bambikino, but there was a limit as to how much of yourself you could wash in it. We would clean our teeth and have a shave, but not much else. I remember once going up to the public baths, but that was quite a long way from Bambikino. Later on, maybe the 3rd time we visited Hamburg, we would go to Astrid Kircher's to watch. I don't think we bathed or showered at all when we were first there, probably not even the 2nd time.
And we didn't realize how they lived. The room they stayed in first was a sort of place where you normally put brooms and things. There was no window. There was just the light bulb on the ceiling. And they were sort of living in these little cupboards, so to speak, right behind the screen of that cinema. And it was terrible because they were smelly, stinky. They couldn't wash their clothes properly.
That was fun, but they didn't spend a lot of time in their rooms anyway. They were always messing around, staying involved in the scene, if you will, and drinking lots of beer. And they are exceptionally conscientious about expanding their appeal. They work painstakingly about trying to figure out what were the best songs, and they wanted to engage fitful crowds. And it didn't take them long to figure out a surefire formula. It got people off. So we're talking about songs like Long Tall Sally, Johnny Be Good, Good Golly Miss Molly, Boney Maroney, Come On Everybody, Rock and Roll Music, Great Balls of Fire, Dizzy Miss Lizzy, the classics. Now, the issue was something that they kind of took as a point of personal pride. They never wanted to have to repeat a song during a set, and they didn't want to be short a song at the end of a set, forcing a hasty relaunch. The crowd never noticed, or at the least didn't mind, but it disheartened the band. Even though they were already overworked, the Beatles devoted hours on end to rehearsing. Most afternoons, they met at the Indra, giving the songs a real workout, packing each measure with rhythmic tension and pulling out all the stops to ensure that the material was hot. And it paid off. So when the Beatles show up in Hamburg, they have their suits and they liked to look good and they wanted to appear professional. They were wearing their suits and they were looking sharp, but here's the issue. Dressed in matching lilac colored sports coats draped over black shirts with a silver stripe on the collar, black slacks, and clay colored imitation crocodile pointy-toed shoes, fancy, or winkle pickers. They looked more like a Cuban nightclub act. Pete Best, who kind of came on later, he didn't have the fun clothes and he was wearing his own black attire and an Italian navy blue jacket, which kind of made him more chill. The band didn't mind wearing their matching outfits, but the issue was they're working so hard that the clothes began to stink and it gave way at the seams. Thanks to Tony Sheridan, he takes the Beatles to the Texas shop at the top of the Reeperbahn, where they find these sleek black leather bomber jackets, Luftwaffe in this case, and hand-stitched cowboy boots. It was exactly what they were looking for, the dark, edgy, uncompromising look. George says, and when we saw those leather pants, we thought, wow, we've got to get some of them. So Astrid took us to a tailor who made us some Napoleators, those great pants. And we found a shop in Hamburg that sold genuine Texas cowboy boots. And it was just a matter of trying to get some money. We may have even paid for them on the weekly. You know, layaway. We all had little pink caps we used to call twat hats that we'd bought in Liverpool. So that became our band uniform, cowboy boots, twat hats, and black leather suits. Somehow this new look, they dressed for the job they wanted. And it seemed to make the Beatles play even harder, if that were possible. They turned it up and up and up. They were putting their little amps to the test and they were trying to make everything as loud as possible. One thing that they learned the crowd really liked was volume. Pete crawls behind his drum set. Paul and John would turn around and say, "Crank it up, Pete. We're really going for it tonight." And eventually neighbors started complaining about the noise, which seems preposterous considering the district's reputation. But Indra was kind of in a secluded area backing up against the perimeter of Grosse Freiheit, so there were people around that were getting kind of annoyed with the Beatles being so Beatley. They start getting noise complaints, and normally Kochschmeider would have ignored the complaints, but the neighbors were mostly elderly, and not the least of whom, this is crazy, was a widow who lived upstairs and claimed that the music was making her sick. Bruno goes to them and he's like, "Guys, turn it down." And they're like, "This is Spinal Tap. We keep it at 11. So they don't. They say it's the most absurd request they've ever heard, and they never turn it down. These neighborly complaints were kind of friendly at first, but then they become more and more aggressive, and the police show up, and they eventually kind of pressure Kochschmeider to do something about it. Finally, Bruno had enough, and in one audacious stroke, he closed the Indra. Instead of just saying, "Hey, Beatles, goodbye," he wound up offering the young Liverpudlians the opportunity to share the Kaiser Keller stage. They could alternate sets with Derry and the seniors. They had a week left on their contract, and the Beatles would just take over. The Kaiser Keller had a bigger stage, better sound, wilder crowds, and hopefully lighter hours. The Beatles were thinking that things were looking up and up, but it wasn't quite as good as it seemed. Rory Storm and the Hurricanes are coming to town, and the Beatles already knew them. They were part of Liverpudlian bands, skiffle bands. I mean, George dated Rory's little sister, Iris, and they were kind of close with the group. They were very friendly. Rory, Storm, and the Hurricanes show up, and they are treated like stars. Rory was dubbed Mr. Showmanship because he really went all out. Now, they did dress in these matching outfits, and they definitely had more of a traditional vibe. One man up front, not a cohesive group like the Beatles, still more coordinated. George Harrison, writing from Hamburg, dismissed the Hurricanes in a single word: crummy. Rory, he reported, does a bit of dancing around, but it still doesn't make up for his phony group. The only person who is any good in the group, George noted, was the drummer, a wiry, bearded lad named Ringo. They were treated like stars. They're getting top billing, paid more, and have more throw. But it didn't really bother the Beatles because they were just more interested in blowing these guys off the stage. And, you know, once again, they're friends with the Hurricanes, so it didn't really bother an issue. They were friendly, even flattering toward Rory. And John, who generally likes to pick on people and hurt them, actually refrained from making fun of Rory's slur. Stutter. He resisted repeated opportunities to ridicule the severely stuttering Rory. In fact, the only Hurricane who eluded the young Beatles, aside from George, was Rory's drummer, the hound-faced, self-mocking jester from the Dingle named Richie Starkey, whom the band fondly called Ringo. Him having a beard, it made him even more intimidating. He seemed older and kind of, what's the word? You know, he would kind of stew about. That's how he looks, you know, that's just his face. From the opening night, October 4th, 1960, the two bands commandeered the Kaiser Keller stage with a red-hot rough-and-tumble force. For more than 7 uninterrupted hours, the band churned out a string of high-octane rockers that left the capacity crowds in a sweaty, beer-soaked frenzy. Every night is like this. You can't see the place through smoke. There are fights that are breaking out. People are throwing bottles. There's broken glass. Bouncers all had truncheons, and if there was a sailor on the floor, you'd see them lay into him, kicking him. Bruno would run up to him screaming and saying, "Don't stop the music. Keep playing." And they did. Every night it gets louder and longer. 7 o'clock in the evening until 5 in the morning. These are those longer hours I mentioned before. There was no let up and no downtime. If a musician needed a bathroom break or got dehydrated and stopped for a sip of water, Kochschmeider angrily waved him back on stage, demanding a full ensemble at all times as stipulated in their contract. "I pay 5 men," he would shout, turning red in the face. Max Schau. He was, Jeffy Bezos. This guy, he wrote the rule book here. Other people would kind of egg John on and say, "Hey, say something they don't understand." And John would go on and say, "Go on, you fucking Krauts, you fucking ignorant German bastards." And they would all think that it's hilarious because they had no idea. Paul once performs in a bed sheet. George draped an old yellowed toilet seat around his neck and goose stepped across the boards. And the Beatles were verroot Crazy. Their show's insanely unpredictable. In a moment of typical abandon, John paraded jauntily on stage in a pair of scabby swimming trunks, selecting a choice moment to moon the unsuspecting audience. According to Pete Best, there was a stunned silence, and then the place erupted. People banging bottles on tables, jumping up and down. And the Beatles were simply undisciplined kids away from home for the first time, engaging in as much rude behavior as they could get away with. Of course, they're getting, at this point, free beer, and they're drinking it like it's go out of style because they're just worried that this nice benefit is going to be taken away. Hardly an hour went by without a beer of some kind. But here's the thing. Once people are buying stuff for them, the Beatles are kind of obliged to drink. Club patrons would send drinks up to the stage, big trays balanced with foaming steins that the band was expected to chug. German customers would say, "You must drink, boys. You must finish the drink," Pete said. And there'd be some sessions, especially at the weekend, when the drinks were coming up faster than our playing. And musicians had to be careful about, they couldn't say no, and especially with some of these seedier club promoters, if they were offered yet another round of drinks, especially when it involved the club owners or their associates, who were regarded as violent gangsters, they had to say yes. Paul said that he would remember the mobsters coming in late at night. They would send up a little tray of schnapps called Doppelkorn, up to the band, demanding that they drink it down straight away. At first, the Beatles are like, please God, no. But they say yes. Certainly not worth provoking a confrontation. There were gas guns and murderers amongst us, so you weren't messing around here, McCartney recalled. So we drink up the schnapps, and occasionally they'd send up pills. These pills, Preludin, is basically diet pills, amphetamines, and at this point they're over the counter. Not Mark Spitz goes into how it winds up kind of controlling the black market, but the Beatles are just using Prellies. They're nicknamed Prellies.
That was also a point of our lives where we Excedrin, and that's the only way we could continue. Preludin, they were called, and you could buy them off of the counter, so we never thought we'd do anything, but you'd get really wired. When you go on for days.
We used to just be up there frothing, the mouth just foaming, just stomping away, doing this stuff.
The Beatles fought fatigue from the outset, and they were so exhausted that they could barely move. But a highball, a potent combo of stimulants, fired the backup jets. According to Ray Innes, once you had a few beers in the odd pill, you could stay awake for days and didn't give a shit. John was already struggling with substance use disorder, alcoholism at that point, and he ate these like candy. And George wrote to his best friend Arthur Kelly that he had been eating Prelly sandwiches. Stuart and Paul did try Prellys. They experimented with them on and on, but they were on and off, but they were a little bit more cautious with it. Paul was always worried you could get a little too wired on stuff like that. Also, Paul is just wired on his own. He doesn't really need something to keep him hyper. I just really love the way that he talks about it now. Only Pete Best abstained, further setting his own beat apart from the rest of the band. Pete just didn't, I've said this since the beginning, the boy couldn't hang. Another conversation surrounding Pete being moody, George says, that was another thing. Pete would never hang out with us. When we finished doing the gig, Pete would go off on his own and we three would hang out together. And then when Ringo was around, it was like a full unit, both on and off the stage. When there were the four of us with Ringo, it felt rockin'. And it's not that he was like an asshole. They were friends, but they were just, they just wouldn't be friends in real life. As parasocial as I can get because I have feelings. I just know the Beatles and I mean, we could get along, but we wouldn't be friends. We don't have a lot in common. I'm not really in the art scene. I'm a writer, but I'm not in artsy scenes. I don't read a lot of poetry or classics. Now, if we're talking films, we could get into that. But music, I have none of that. The sleazy, sexy stuff, I'm married and I'm sober, so that's all out too. And I just think we just wouldn't have that much in common. Even if I met a Beatle, I don't know how I feel about the idea of interviewing Ringo or Paul, because sometimes people will say things like really flattering things that are just earth-shatteringly sweet but untrue about how I'm like really good journalist or a historian. I'm not a historian. Do not call me a historian. Okay. But someone has said one time, it's one person, oh, we should get you to interview Ringo. And that would be great. But here's the thing. I don't know if I'd want to interview Ringo. One, nerves. But two, I would really only want to interview the Beatles if I knew for certain that they were just going to tell me the truth. I just want information. I don't want to be a hyped up fan. I just want info. And I want them to be candid about the info that I want rather rather than having an interview with the Beatles or hang out with them or be friends with them or whatever, I would really like to be just a fly on the wall. And I know that that sounds untrue and pretentious, but I would be just as cryy and emotional and empathetic and insane as a fly on the wall. But I want to see the whole human experience. But I know that we just wouldn't be friends. I would be like Pete. They'd be like, I guess you're cool, but you're kind of lame, you know, and that's fine. That's okay. We're not all going to be besties. They're interesting and I'm not. Okay. Back to this. Songs grew more aggressive, convoluted, and unpredictable. They would peak out the volume and the boys gyroscoped on and off the stage, working themselves into a frenzy and leaving everyone exhilarated and exhausted. What's kind of funny is that the Kaiserkeller had this like rickety stage that was not really proper stage. It was a couple of planks of wood supported by empty Schweppes crates, and it had always slumped to one side. Even though Bruno would promise, hey, I'm gonna fix it, shut up, I'm gonna fix it, he never did. The bands would talk to each other and they'd be like, what you wanna bet that we can bust down the stage tonight? We're gonna go hard enough that we're gonna break the stage. No, we're gonna go hard enough that we're gonna break the stage. They make it a thing and they say, we're gonna use the heels of our cowboy boots and we're just gonna make a beat to the song, we're gonna go crazy. The Beatles start first with Roll Over Beethoven. Spitz writes, was almost Russian in its execution. They try, they work hard and hard and hard, and it just holds on. Pete says, it hung on and we were getting frustrated. After 4 sets, the bands give up in disgust, but Rory summoned up enough energy and leapt off the piano right onto a weak spot. There was a loud crack and all the planks went up in a V shape and the center caved in. How satisfying would that be? Oh my God. Okay, anyway, moments later, the amplifiers toppled over and slid into the hole along with the mics and Ringo's cymbals. Bruno is super pissed and he comes running after them, and all of the boys run across the street into a diner, I guess. All 7 boys crammed into 2 adjoining booths, laughing and telling war stories over bowls of cornflakes and pints of freezing cold milk. Kochschmeider shows up with his goons and they're looking pissed off. So the boys scramble, they run away, and they get away. And Bruno has a new stage the next day. So they go out to inspect the new stage, but to their collective dismay, not much had changed. The old stage had been repaired in the most makeshift manner. It was even more treacherous and unstable, like a waterbed. No thanks. I have rheumatoid arthritis and a lot of issues with my joints. My ankles are rolling just thinking about it. The Beatles never really thought that they had fans at this point, especially in these clubs. They were background noise and kind of just a party aspect, but fans, not quite so much. They were more of an attraction than, you know what I'm saying? But the trio starts showing up, and the Beatles notice the trio sitting rigidly upright near the front and left of the stage. So they're just kind of not bringing a lot of attention to themselves, but they stood out like sore thumbs, dressed rather exotically as they were in suede jackets, wool sweaters, jeans, and round-toed slippers. So enter Klaus Vormann, Jürgen Vollmer, and Astrid Kircher. Klaus was the first to see the Beatles. He and Astrid, who had been dating for about 2 years, got in an argument, and he said, I am going for a walk. And he walks into the Kaiserkeller. He sees the Beatles and he is just taken with them. Eventually he tries to approach them. He talks to John. He hands him a crumpled record sleeve that he designed, and John was uninterested. He kind of skives him off onto Stu and he says, you should talk to Stuart. He's the artist around here. And it's like, John, you were in art school too. Chill. But
that particular day, I had an argument with Astrid. I was really angry and I wanted to let steam. And I quite often went that direction. Reaper Bar is really for the sailors, for the people getting drunk, for people going to see naked women or having sex or whatever. That's what this place is known for.
The inception of meeting the Exies. Paul says, one of the days we were doing our stuff and some slightly strange looking people arrived who didn't look like anyone else because these bars were full of sailors, as we're seeing in the movie. Immediately we felt, hey, kindred spirits, something's going on here. They came in and sat down and they were Astrid, Jürgen, and Klaus. Klaus Vormann later played bass with Manfred Mann, and he also played in Plastic Ono Band and in Concert for Bangladesh and a bunch of other places. Jürgen was Jürgen Vollmer, who was still a good photographer. So was Astrid Kircher, who was to be Stuart's girlfriend. They were the big love. Anyway, they arrived, sat down, and we could see that they had something different, and we were also what they were looking for. George says Astrid was the girlfriend of Klaus at first, and they'd had a row one night, so he'd gone off in a huff. He was pissed off with her, and he came down to this very bad area of Hamburg where where he would never have gone otherwise. He was walking around and he heard this noise coming out of a cellar, so he came into the Kaiser Keller, saw us, and thought we were really interesting. He went back and told Astrid and brought her and some of her friends. There were ballet dancers with them, and they started coming in on a regular basis to see us. Astrid and Klaus would come in the most frequently. They liked our band, and she wanted to photograph us.
Klaus was always very laid back. You couldn't quite impress him by things. He always said, yeah, great, fantastic. But when he came home, seeing the Beatles for the first time, I've never seen him like that before. He just went crazy.
Stu was totally interested in Klaus. He had actually noticed the trio, and he thought that they were bohemians. He discovered them staring at him in an openly seductive manner, and in a letter to a friend admitted an instant mutual attraction, acknowledging that it was extremely difficult to keep my eyes off them. He was completely captivated by them. They were art students, and they had a lot in common.
The ones who became our real friends were the ones who are known now as Klaus Bormann, Jürgen Vollmann, and Astrid, who took all the famous photographs of us at that period.
For Stu and the trio, it was love at first sight. Stuart was immediately drawn to Klaus and Jürgen and Astrid. She captivated men with her attitude rather than her beauty. She relied more on an aura of mystery and dreamy sophistication. And the boys were just really interesting young men. Stu falls for them, they fall for Stu, and a vulnerable Sutcliffe was clearly entranced. Their energy was irresistibly addictive. I had never met anyone like them, he gushed. It's somehow like a dream, which I'm still participating in. And here's what Stuart said. Just recently, I have found the most wonderful friends, the most beautiful looking trio I have ever seen. I was completely captivated by their charm. The girl thought I was the most handsome of the lot. Here was I, feeling the most insipid working member of the group, being told how superior I looked. This alongside the great Romeo John Lennon and his two stalwarts Paul and George, the Casanovas of Hamburg. The young Germans were equally in the thrall of their Liverpool darling, so they love Stu too. Jürgen says, my impression was that Stuart just didn't fit in. He was strange when compared to others in that group. He wasn't a part of the Beatles. He was always like an outsider, dreaming all the time that he played the wrong notes and got looks from Paul and George. They meet Stu and kind of early, they're like, why are you playing with them? They kind of caught on immediately, like, what are you doing here? Stu wrote, they could see immediately. They said, here was I, feeling the most insipid. Let's see. Stuart wrote to a friend and he was delighted that they'd pegged him as an artist and that they found him to be attractive. They could say immediately, they said, here was I, feeling the most insipid working member of the group and told how superior I looked. This alongside the great Romeo John Lennon and his two stalwarts, Paul and George, the Casanovas of Hamburg. The trio, whom John dubbed the Exies as a jibe to their existentialist affection, knew practically nothing about rock and roll but immediately fell in love. Paul says, they all liked rock and roll and the quiffed back hairdos, but they were different. They wore all black. In fact, we got a lot of our look from them. They called themselves Exies, existentialists. They were not rockers or mods, but Exies. We were still in rocker mode, but as I say, a little different from the other groups, different material, different sense of humor. Stuart had got himself looking like James Dean. He would put on his shades and stand there with his bass. It was all a big pose. At first, they were blown away by Stuart. They eventually weren't looking for musicianship. It was image. And when Stuart turned out to be a painter, and as John was an art student and they were art students, there was this great connection. So we had drinks with them and chatted and soon really got to know them well. They were totally and immediately fascinated by rock. They found it to be entertaining, sexy, unpredictable. They were totally fans, totally in awe, Vollmer said. The quality, the chemistry, the way they interrelated was marvelous. Astrid said, it was like a merry-go-round in my head. They looked absolutely astonishing. My whole life changed in a couple of minutes. All I wanted to do was to be with them and to know them.
I just freaked out. Seeing them on stage, faces I always dreamt of taking pictures of, because they had so much personality and were still young like I was.
George says, they were all very nice people. It was really good for us to meet them too because they were more cultured than the locals. They had a great appreciation for us, but they were very artistic and interesting in themselves. They were the very arty crowd around Hamburg. We started hanging out with them. We learned more from them at that point than they had learned from us, including style. Klaus, Astrid, and Jürgen became real friends. Klaus later became a bass player himself and played on many of my records and other people's. Birth control. Where you at? You never know when you're gonna come up pregnant. I couldn't imagine a worse fate for a person like me. And Astrid was so loving. She'd take us home and feed us. She helped us a lot, even just to let us have a bath. Astrid was 22 at that time, and I was 17. She seemed so much older than me and so grown up. Eventually, Stuart and Astrid got off with each other, and Astrid was really cute. So was Stuart. You can see from their pictures that they were.
It was really good for us to meet them too. They in themselves were very artistic. I mean, for us, we started hanging out with them. And Astrid was so loving. She really helped us a lot.
So Astrid is a photographer, a phenomenal photographer, and I will show her photos probably like right now. I don't know. Whenever I want to, I will. And she gets in with the Beatles by saying, hey, we're going to do a photo shoot. This is shown really well in the movie. So rather than read through this, I'm going to let you see the depiction in Backbeat later on. So just put a pin in it. Following their photo session, she drove the band, minus Pete Best, who chose not to accompany them, to her mom's house, which is where Astrid stays.
Astrid took them to her house and she cooked for them. Astrid's mother was cooking the favorite meals for them. So they had their little home suddenly, which Astrid really took care of them really well.
It's a handsome, solid-looking house in a fashionable neighborhood. It was tasteful. The Beatles are coming into this place after living in like a glorified closet, and they are seeing this nice house. Astrid brings them up to her attic studio, and it was the site for which they were totally unprepared. The room, which faced the back of the house, was like Satan's lair. Black curtains and sheets covered the shuttered window. The furniture had been painted black to match the bedspread. A black cloth covered the mirror with sheets of aluminum foil pasted to the walls to reflect light from the black candles that cast a somber glow. Actually, the room was decorated like this for Klaus, who had been Astrid's lover for about 2 years.
George was just sitting there looking at my room, which must have been very strange to them, because it was completely black with leaves and branches hanging from the ceiling. I think at first George thought I was a bit mad.
Klaus lived in an apartment just around the corner, but he spent a lot of his time with Astrid. And the relationship had really almost suddenly became platonic because once Astrid saw Stu, she immediately fell in love with him. And it was mutual.
You may think it was sexually. Of course, in a way, they all fancied me because I was quite good looking and charming in my own little way with my funny English.
Now, the thing is that in Backbeat, there's a lot of jealousy and portrayal between Klaus and them. There wasn't really. He and Astrid remained very good friends until the end of Astrid's life, and Stu and Klaus remained friends as well. At first, it was purely physical, spurred by his tight jeans and leather jacket. But after those first few minutes, Jürgen Vollmer said, she became fascinated with Stuart.
When I started falling in love with Stuart, it was great that I was a photographer, so I could just go up easily to him and ask him, do you mind if I take pictures of you? Because I felt so attracted to him.
And Stuart let it be known that he was infatuated with her, a friend recalls. Others have said that he was besotted with her. Almost from the start, Stuart began hounding Astrid's inner circle for any scrap of information about her, how she thought, what she liked, who she fancied. He didn't want to alienate Klaus, who remained devotedly at her side, but there was no secret to their mutual attraction. It was unrestrained and intense and grew increasingly more passionate with each passing day. As the Beatles are going on and being super loud and working on their set, they're all becoming stronger. There's a lot of flack thrown toward Pete because he just didn't have the scratch when it came to the Beatles becoming the real Beatles, right? But at this point, he's doing a good job. They're all becoming stronger as musicians, as a group together, except Stu.
Well, when we first met him, he couldn't play at all. When he first got a bass. But he knew that too. That's why, he was never really that at ease being in the band, and that's why he left when we finished the gig in Hamburg. He decided to go back to art college.
Only Stuart remained a lingering problem. Nothing had changed. He had absolutely no facility for the bass, no innate feel for music. Even the Exies, his most ardent admirers, recognized his inadequacy on stage. None of the Beatles had any illusions about Stu. They knew he was inept, eternally an amateur. But something else counted for more than pure ability. He was a mate, yet for all the friendship in the world, his welcome as a Beatle was wearing thin, especially with Paul. And Paul was like a very practical person, but to the detriment of sparing people's feelings.
And around about this time, Stuart and I got a little bit fraught too. I claim that what I was trying to do was make sure we were musically very good. But this did create a couple of rifts, and I can see now how I could have been more sensitive to it. But who's sensitive at that age? Certainly not me.
With Stu on bass, there was always something holding us back, and he thought that Stu was the weakest link, a glaring embarrassment, and it reflected poorly on all of them. And even though it bothered John, he was helpless or unwilling to do anything about it. Now, the others suggested that Stuart turn away from the audience just to kind of, trick them. Like, be cool. They won't notice how misplaced your fingering is. But people had ears, and with the band's rapid strides, the clams he played sounded ever more pronounced. Paul says, "There's something that I like to get straight because it is kind of historical. Someone a few years ago said how it was my relentless ambition that pushed Stu out of the group. We did have some arguments, me and Stu, but actually I just wanted us to be a really cracking band, and Stu, being a cracking artist, held us back a little bit. Not too much. If ever it came to the push, when there was someone in there watching us, I'd feel, oh, I hope Stu doesn't blow it. I could trust the rest of us. That was it. Stuart would tend to turn away a little so as to not be too obvious about what key he was in case it wasn't our key. Stuart wasn't oblivious. He knew that he kind of sucked. And he wrote to his friend Sue Williams in October 1960, I have definitely decided to pack in the band at the beginning of January. He says, my curiosity is quenched as far as rock and roll is concerned anyway. But he never told the Beatles this. This is something that he just kind of kept to himself. If Stuart contemplated leaving, as he implied, he kept the news to himself, which only served to sow resentment among the once contented Beatles. Even though John wasn't going to sack Stu, it started to piss John off in a very John way. Signs of souring showed in their usually puncture-proof relationship. Veiled glances at first, then eventually the unforeseen snide comment lobbed into the midst of a group conversation. John is known to insult people. Acid-tipped barbs flying around, he aimed them more accurately at Stuart, who internalized them. John would snap without warning. He poked fun at Stuart being too graceful, his persona, his size because he's little, and of course how much he loved Astrid. He was always kidding, but kidding in a way that was borderline hurting, said Jurgen. And Stuart just was used to kind of being picked on, and he just took it from John and never pushed back. Stuart was no match for him, Bill Harry said. John actually talked about how they all picked on Stu. He says, we were terrible. We'd tell Stu that he couldn't sit with us or eat with us. We'd tell him to go away. And he did. That was how he learned to be with us. It was all stupid, but that's what we were like. On October 21st, a new club opened, and that is called the Top 10 Club. And the illustrious bad boy that everyone kind of looks up to, Tony Sheridan, who is much more unpredictable, but in a bad way on stage, even though he's great, but he could be rough. He starts at the Top 10 Club. The Top 10 was a sensational, glitzy venue holding space which was formerly occupied by a peep show. One of the most special thing about this was their sound system. We suddenly realized that it was a far better club than Kochschmeider's. We're called Pete Best. Better clientele, plus the sound system had echo mics, reverb, and all that type of stuff. They really were trying or vying, hoping one day that they would get over there. The Beatles are starting to try to say, hey, we're seeing what's going on over there. You want to pay us more, give us better working conditions, maybe fix the waterbed stage. Bruno didn't like this. The last thing he expected was a power play by this ungrateful British band. He turned the Beatles down flat, reminding them of their existing contract. As far as Bruno thought, this is the end of it, but the Beatles were kind of pissed off and they went over to the owner of the Top 10, and Eckern offered them a job on the spot. Now this pissed off Bruno, and he went on the offensive. He immediately terminates the Beatles' contract. You know what I mentioned about George, the shaking chihuahua that somehow got away with making it to Hamburg. Suddenly, the cops are on to him. Nobody knows exactly who ratted him out, but it was probably Bruno. It's November 20th and George comes under scrutiny and he winds up getting caught having no work permit and he had to leave Germany.
And right before that happened, I got busted for being underage. And eventually, somebody found out we didn't have any work permits. So they started closing in on us and the police came one day and then they just booted me out. And that was right at a critical time because we'd decided we'd been offered a job to go to this other club.
At first, the Beatles are thinking we can try to make this work, and we're going to take our chances by leaving the Kaiser Keller, and we're going to go to the top 10. Ekern offered the Beatles immediate work along with a modest attic apartment above the top 10, and it seemed like the perfect antidote to an otherwise deteriorating situation. But Paul and Pete go back to the Bambino to collect their things, which is where they're staying at this point. You know how they said that there's no light? They can't see anything because they're geniuses. They're like, let's light condoms on fire and nail them to the wall. That'll work for light.
We pinned it up on the wall, and for a boyish prank, we set fire to it. So we left a little sort of little black sort of rubber stain on the wall, and that was like, you know, right, we're going, hey, on to better things. But of course, the fellow wasn't pleased we were going to the new club anyway.
And anyway, they just give us enough light to throw our stuff into suitcases, Pete said. It's December 1st, early morning hours, that 2 plainclothes cops show up at the top 10 and ask for Pete and Paul for questioning. They didn't even give them time to get dressed.
Because this was competition. We're taking all our business, all his business, to this new club. So he immediately rang up the police, and we were just sort of walking down the river and sort of, come with me. And we were put in jail for about 3 hours, first time in our lives, you know. Bloody hell, German jail.
And the police were not amused by their little condom thing, and they accused the boys of trying to burn down the Bambino. And they decided to scare the British hooligans by transferring them to a dingy jail cell for several hours before deporting them.
The new club owners, where we were going to, came, I think, and gave them a bottle of scotch or something and got us out.
Stewart said, "We finished at the Kaiser Keller last week. The police intervened because we had no work permits. Paul and Peter, the drummer, were deported yesterday and sent in handcuffs to the airport. I was innocent at this time, accused of arson, that is, setting fire to the kino where we slept. I arrive at the club and am informed that the whole of the Hamburg police are looking for me. The rest of the band are already locked up, so smiling and on the arm of Astrid, I proceed to give myself up. At this time, I'm not aware of the charges. All of my belongings, including spectacles, are taken away, and I'm led to a cell where, without food or drink, I sat for 6 hours. On a very wooden bench, and the doors shut very tight. I signed a confession in Deutsch that I knew nothing about the fire, and they let me go. The next day, Paul and Pete were deported and sent home by plane. John and I were without money and job. The police had forbidden us to work, as already we were liable to deportation for working 3 months in the country illegally. The next day, John went home. I stayed till January at Astrid's house. At the moment, she's washing all my muck and filth collected over the last few months. God, I love her so much." At this point, John Stewart stayed in Hamburg, but without work permits at this point, it was kind of like, well, what's the point? We can't make any money. So John stayed only long enough to cadge money for a train ticket home, and Stewart was recovering from a head cold, and then he gets money off of Astrid to finally get airfare home.
Well, Paul and Pete got, deported by the police for burning the condom on the wall. So they were back before me, and John got back about 2 days later. I was really happy, thinking, oh, great. And then that's what the support of nature, you see. And Stuart just stayed there because he decided to get very-hearted with Astrid.
The boys come home all separately, and none of them talk for a couple of weeks. And this is one of the darkest times, in my opinion, of the Beatles, because they all thought that the Beatles were over. They weren't saying as much, but each of the Beatles were convinced that his career in the band was over. And in fact, all of them, or most of them, start seeking employment because they're like, we're done. But eventually they start playing, getting back on their feet at the Casbah Coffee Club, Mona Best, Pete's mom. It's kind of the first place that they can start to get their confidence back, and they're getting more comfortable on stage. But whatever confidence the Beatles had managed to generate on stage of late was quickly dissipated in uncertainty because Stewart still hadn't returned from Hamburg. So I guess he went back. Okay. A little confused on the timeline here, but I'm not sure how much it matters. Let's pretend that it doesn't matter. Does it matter? This is supposed to be low effort. Okay. What had detained Stewart for so long? Everyone knew that he was dazzled by Astrid, and they knew that he was so in love with her, but everyone was surprised, flabbergasted, when Stewart wrote home that they were engaged. No one had seen it coming, least of all his parents, who were utterly devastated by the news. This news, as they read it, wrecked everything. His art, his education, his enormous promise, and he had written them before Christmas to ask for their blessing to get engaged, and they had a difficult time giving it, as did George. He didn't seem keen on the idea of me getting engaged, Stewart wrote to his sister, Pauline, and he was hoping that people would become more used to the idea with time. But this is not not what happened. When he returns back home in February, Stuart's mom was still suffering from shock, anguished that anybody would be taking her son away from her. Boy moms are crazy. Anyway, so the Beatles in their own way were also kind of pissed off. They were like not very receptive to this. They needled Stuart mercilessly about the engagement, picking on him for being weak, distracted, foolish, pussy whipped. If you think about it, it's kind of like, this is absurd. Why do you guys care? Why are you reacting so strongly toward, your friend getting engaged, being married, like in his love life? Why are you mad? But they did care. Fellas, is it gay to react negatively to your friend's engagement? And they didn't let up about it at all. And it wasn't just about Astrid, okay? Because the Beatles had been still kind of ruminating over Stuart's ersatz role in the Beatles. Now it seemed only underscored by their success. And, quote, they felt it sorely when returning to Liverpool, with either Paul or the Black Jats' Chas Newby standing in for him. George wrote to Stu and said, "Come home sooner. It's no good with Paul playing bass. We've decided." But this was kind of just lip service, okay? Everyone knew that Stu was holding them back, and no one had the heart or the wherewithal to suggest that he step aside, because that responsibility was John's burden. So when the Beatles go back to Hamburg, Dot, which is Paul's girlfriend, and Cynthia, which is John's soon-to-be wife at this point, they're kind of like, great, our boyfriends are going away again. Now, what was kind of nice, even though the guys are living in debaucherous style at this point, they keep up with writing letters and kind of make sure the girls feel like our relationships are intact. John was a little insane with his letters. They're kind of adorable, but a little psychotic. They were secure in their relationship. And they're returning to Hamburg. Stuart got there first, and he was impervious to his parents' dismay. He intended to marry Astrid. The decision practically broke his mother's heart. Forsaking his scholarship seemed like such a tragic mistake to Millie, who was also terrified for her son's safety. In January, he had been beaten up again, this time more severely, fracturing his skull following a gig at Latham Hall. But no matter how Millie begged him to reconsider, Stuart stood his ground. Now, the Beatles were kind of like, man, we're better off without Stuart, and him not being with us kind of gave us time to regroup in Hamburg without having to compensate for his unsteadiness. But they still, it was tough. It was tough. They're playing at the top 10. It was a step up from the Kaiser Keller. The bouncers and such, they're pretty rough and tumble. They are violent, and they carried gas guns and knuckle dusters, in addition to the ubiquitous truncheons, and they relished using them. If someone got out of line, a musician recalls, the waiters simply dragged them outside in the alley and pounded these people to shit. One thing that they do talk about quite a bit in Anthology, and we do see just in the movie as well, is that there is a lot of rowdy violence. It was kind of difficult, still post-war era. Stuart said, "One thing I'm sure about since I've been here, I hate brutality. There is so much in this area." Stuart's former plans of quitting the Beatles that he wrote about were clear-cut and firm at one point, but now they've kind of fallen to the wayside. He takes to the stage and starts singing "Love Me Tender." It's a request. And he writes in a letter to Pauline, his sister, "Everybody says I sing it better than Elvis. Just before I sing, I receive the best applause of the night. Minutes after I finish singing, people all look at me with sad eyes and sad looks on their faces. Recently, I've become very popular with both the girls and homosexuals who tell me I'm the sweetest, most beautiful boy. Also, it appears that people refer to me as the James Dean of Hamburg." Regardless of this, the Beatles still picked on him mercilessly about his appearance, his size, his dependence on Astrid, anything that they could come up with. And Stuart was constantly the butt of the joke. Even though it was a joke, it eventually turns nasty with an edge of abusiveness. Hardly a night that went by that John didn't turn on Stuart, needling him, severely berating some sort of aspect of his fragile character. As Stuart becomes more and more entrenched with Astrid, it is harder to consider him one of the group. And as he withdrew from the pack, moving into Astrid's house, that seems kind of like the final straw. But Stuart is the one who is most open to these new experiences. He starts wearing a leather suit. He made use of flamboyant clothes and accessories to transform himself. He's the one who started with the flashy new Beatle haircut. Astrid had styled it, which I think is interesting, because while dating Klaus Vormann, she had urged him to cut his hair that way to please her aesthetically, as well to show his dedication. With Stewart's accession, it became his dutiful rite of passage. There's no clear way of knowing how the other Beatles responded in truth to Stewart's deviant hairstyle. Out of ignorance or envy, they lashed out defensively, pelting Stewart with an arsenal of childish taunts. But 2 days later, a hesitant George followed suit, brushing his pompadour into an informal shaggy mop, and like that, the mold for the Beatle haircut was indelibly cast. As I mentioned, anthology readings cutting in, some of this fashion stuff and haircut stuff, there's a lot of stories, so we're just going to put it in here, and it's kind of like, okay guys, memories and stuff, but I think all of these things are just like sort of true. One thing that is covered and talked about so much is the Beatle haircut. In the movie, we talk about Astrid in the Beatle haircut, and she already had it, so she was looking really cool, and honestly, she looks so cool. And what's her face? Oh my god, the actress. Cheryl Lee, oh my god, I just want to call her Laura Palmer. Fuck you, David Lynch. Fix our hearts or die. Okay, anyway, Paul and John are talking about their trip to Paris, which that's a video in itself. But they say that while they're in Paris, they run into Jurgen. And John says, Jurgen also had bell-bottom trousers, but we thought that that would be considered too queer back in Liverpool. We didn't want to appear feminine or anything like that because our audience in Liverpool still had a lot of fellas. We were playing rock dressed in leather, though Paul's ballads were bringing in more and more girls. Anyway, Jurgen had a flattened down hairstyle with a fringe in the front, which we rather took to. We went over to his place there and then, and he hacked would be a better word, our hair into the same style. Paul said he had this mod style, and we would say, would you do our hair like yours? We're on holiday. What the hell? We're buying capes and pantaloons, throwing caution to the wind. And he says, no, boys, no, I like you as rocker. You look great. But we begged him enough, and he said, all right. And he didn't quite do it the same as his, which is funny. Regarding fashion, Paul talks about their second time in Hamburg, and he says, we tried our Beatle hairstyle in Hamburg this time. It was all part of trying to pull people in. Come in, we are very good at rock and roll. George says, Astrid and Klaus were very influential. I remember we went to the swimming baths once and my hair down from the water, and they said, no, leave it, it's good. I didn't have my Vaseline anyway, and I was thinking, well, these people are cool. If they think it's good, I'll leave it like this. And they gave me that confidence, and when it dried off, it dried naturally down, which later became the look. Before that, as a rocker, I wore my hair back, though it would never go back without a fight. It goes forward when I wash it. It just grows into a Beatle cut. I used to have to put thick Vaseline on my hair just to hold it back. I remember cutting John's hair one time, and I tried to get him to cut mine, and we did it just as a joke, only the once, but I don't think he cut mine as professionally as I cut his. John says, that was the last time I cut anybody's hair. George says, and when we saw those leather pants, we thought, wow, we've got to get some of them. So Astrid took us to a tailor who made us some Napoleators, those great pants, and we found a shop in Hamburg that sold genuine Texas cowboy boots, and it was just a matter of trying to get some money. We may have even paid for them on the weekly. Layaway. We all had little pink caps we used to call twat hats that we'd bought in Liverpool, so that became our band uniform: cowboy boots, twat hats, and black leather suits. The Beatles are on their residency, and Cynthia and Dot show up, and in spite of thinking, oh god, what a cock block, it was actually a really nice trip. Cynthia was worried about Astrid because when John would write home, which was all the time, he would be talking, and she said it was like Astrid this, Astrid that. And she sounded as though she could run rings around me in every way, Cynthia wrote in a twist of Lennon. Spitz wrote, few women could have satisfied John's Bridget Bardot fantasy more ably than Astrid. Like the art college beauty Johnny Crosby, she was a blonde, slim-hipped, heat-seeking woman oozing mystique. But as far as is known, John's relationship with Astrid never got more physical than a brotherly hug. It wasn't that he didn't love after her. He did, most likely in a big way too, but she was Stewart's girl, so that's where it began and ended. But Dot's there, and she's taking in the tension in the group, and she's saying you could see it when you watch Pete Best. He was very quiet in these situations. He was unable to join in the conversation with the other guys. He was never fast enough for their comments. John and Paul were fierce, and George was no threat to them, but Pete was not the main issue. Even though the girls loved Pete, Paul wasn't really jealous of him, but he hated Stu. So this is Dot saying that. In fact, everything Stewart did now seemed to enrage him. He felt like he had been suffering Stewart's arrogance and having to capitulate to John's apologies, and Paul was forced to kind of take it on the chin. It wasn't just the music and the hair and the clothes. It was also the fact that he was jealous of Stu, especially of Stu's friendship with John. And what's more, Stewart flaunted it. Time and time again, he put it under Paul's nose and gave it a scornful swish. Eventually, this comes to a head. They get into a fight on stage, and Dot talks about it, saying that She and Cynthia were dollying up at Astrid's place. By the way, even though Cynthia was concerned about Astrid, they got along really well. So they're dollying up at Astrid's place. Stu calls up and is like, get them out of here. And he's in a white hot rage. He comes to say that Paul and Stuart had finally had it out, not in private, but on stage in the middle of a set in full view of astonished German audience. Paul was at the piano and he had been looking at Stu every time he screwed up a chord, and he was just giving him faces. Eventually, he let go and said something outrageous about Astrid that pissed off Stu. So Stu drops the bass, jumps at Paul, and caught him with such a wallop that it knocked him off his stool. So then the boys, it's like months and months and months of just hating each other, comes out and they're wrestling on the stage and fighting each other and beep, beep, beep. They rolled around on the floor and they basically beat the shit out of each other until finally John, George, and Pete pried them apart. Nothing was really settled by the fight. It was just like blowing off steam, I guess. But Pete says that it was the beginning and end of Stu as a Beatle. Round about this time, Stuart and I got a little fraught too. I claimed that I was making sure that we were musically very good in case anyone was watching. I felt that we had to be good for any talent spotters. People would now call that the perfectionist in me. I see it as trying to get it right, but not obsessively so. This did create a couple of riffs, and I could have been more sensitive about it. But who is sensitive at that age? Certainly not me. Stuart and I once had an actual fight on stage. I thought I'd beat him hands down because he was littler than me, but he was strong, and we got into a sort of death grip on stage during the set. It was terrible. We must have called each other something one too many times. Oh, you're calling me that? Then we locked, and neither of us wanted to go any further, and all the others were shouting, stop it, you two. I'll stop it if he will. So here's continuation of the fight. John says Paul was saying something about Stu's girl. He was jealous because she was a great girl, and Stu hit him on stage. Stu wasn't a violent guy at all. Paul says, of course, all the big gangsters around here were all laughing at us because they were used to killing people. Here were me and Stu, neither of us big fighters. None of this helped my relationship with Stuart or Pete. George said, sometimes in the van with all the stress we were under, little bitching went on, and Paul and he used to punch each other out a bit. I remember the two of them wrestling one time. Paul thought he'd win easily because Stuart was such a little bloke, but Stuart suddenly got this amazing strength that Paul hadn't bargained for. I once had a bit of a fight with Stuart as well, but we were very friendly other than that, certainly by the end. Stu knew that this situation was untenable. There was no place for him on the stage at this point, and Paul had made that extremely clear, and John, not really even sticking up for Stu at this point, was also making it clear. In addition to the music just sucking, Stu had no artistic inspiration at this point. He had barely picked up his paintbrush and mutts. That alone struck him as absurd. He'd made a horrendous mistake in ignoring his art for so long and needed to reclaim that part of his life. So when he finally quits the Beatles, there's no formal resignation. It was all very matter of fact, devoid of lingering resentment or even drama. If the Beatles were surprised, no one let it show, nor did anyone try to discourage Stuart from leaving. He gives Paul his bass, and it wasn't like this big show of handing over the thing. Paul had to play it upside down because he didn't want to restring it. Eventually, Stuart is like, we know I'm not that good. Y'all know I'm not that good. We know that I like painting. I'm a little bit country. You're a little bit rock and roll. It's time to go. Also, have you seen my girlfriend / fiance? George says Stuart was engaged to Astrid, and after that trip decided that he was going to leave the band and live in Germany because Eduardo Palazzi was coming to be the lecturer at Hamburg Art College. I'm still flipping the Hamburg. I can't help it. Hamburg at Hamburg Art College, whatever, fuck it. Stu had never really been that single-minded about the music. We liked him in the band. He looked great, and he learned enough to get by, but he was never totally convinced that he was going to be a musician. He said that he was going to be a musician. He said, I'm out of the band, lads. I'm going to stay in Hamburg with Astrid. And at that point I said, we're not going to get a fifth person in the band. One of us three is going to be the bass player, and it's not going to be me. And John said, it's not going to be me. And Paul didn't seem to mind the idea. Paul says, I really got lumbered with the bass. Nobody actually wanted to play bass. That's why Stuart was playing it. We all really wanted to be guitarists, and we were 3 guitars to start off with. When it became clear that Stu was leaving the band because of Astrid, I asked him in the transition period to lend me his bass, which for me was upside down, although I couldn't change the strings around in case he ever wanted to play it. By then, I had learned to play the guitar upside down anyway because John would never let me turn the strings around on his guitar, and neither would George. It was just too inconvenient for them to have to turn them all around back again. So things go on, and the Beatles are now a 4-man group because George did not want a fifth. And Stu lives in Hamburg and they're making it work. So we're going to skip through, and there's lots of Brian stuff here. Okay. Stu wasn't expected to return from Hamburg before the summer, the 1962. He had talked about spending the winter in Germany and told his family that he's in art school now and it's foremost on his agenda. But as the holidays grew nearer, he was getting homesick and he wanted to introduce his family to Astrid because they're getting married. So he winds up coming home. No one looked forward to it as much as John and George. Both Beatles had kept up a fairly steady correspondence with Stewart and noticed a bewildering emotional change in his most recent letters. The tone he used in them was not one that his friends were used to hearing when he'd hung out together in Hamburg. He'd written on for 10 or 15 handwritten pages at a clip, loose, blustering, hypersensitive affairs in which he'd begun to ramble incoherently. Ray Coleman was given a rare look at the letters. He set it off to a restlessness about life, but the agitation mortared between the lines revealed a consuming madness. His letters home were clearly distressed, bizarre, and disturbed, which is what Pauline said. And Millie Sutcliffe thought that it was probably the drugs, the lifestyle, being up all night painting, and probably Astrid. But once Astrid and Stu show up, they love Astrid. They're just like, oh my God, you guys are so in love and Astrid's amazing. So, you know, we were wrong. Okay, finally, we're wrong. You know, welcome to the family, lady. I might have been a little too kind in this situation saying that they all came around. I think that they came around to her face, because the more that I've learned, and I haven't read Pauline's book. She wrote a book with Alan Clayson, and I'm a little disappointed with Alan Clayson and some of the conclusions drawn in that book because I like Alan Clayson's work. We're gonna let it go for right now, and we will do a deeper dive on those sources, put the Lewis and feet to the flames. We'll do that later. I think as time went by, Stuart's death is coming, but we all know that Stuart died in Hamburg. I think as time went by, traffic, because Stu was in Hamburg because of Astrid and he died so young, there might have been blame on Astrid due to the young death and stuff. So I think opinions on Astrid soured from the family. So I don't want to make it sound like it was all roses. It wasn't roses. Here's the thing though. Astrid looks amazing, as usual, but Stu does not look good. Bill Harry says that he looked absolutely god-awful. It was almost scary seeing what had become of him. He was pale and withered and complained about headaches, severe headaches that would almost cripple him. He had been afflicted with migraines and flashes of extreme pain. They came without warning and could disappear in an instant or linger on for several hours. Jarred by this news, his mother demanded he see a doctor, but was told that there was no supporting evidence that anything was wrong with him. I suffer from migraines. I've been dealing with them a lot more lately, and it's a whole thing. We're trying to work it out, but nothing nearly as severe as what Stu went through, and you know, obviously turns tragic. But just what I suffer with, I'm just like, what I'm hearing here, it's untenable. I cannot imagine. So all Stuart wanted to talk about was his art, and his passion had resumed with new fervor. The Beatles were super happy to see Stuart. There was like no hard feelings when they saw him, and it was just friends coming back together. Even Paul had gotten over his bullshit. They had just come to make peace with each other, and Stu was at peace with his new life auf Deutschland. The Beatles were his mate, and he remained their undying fan, but as mates, they'd revealed themselves in ways that had demonstrated frightening judgment. He warned his sister to exercise the good sense to keep away from the Beatles because they're a bad lot, completely lacking in moral fiber. Fair. They were mean. So the Beatles are returning to Hamburg. They're so excited to go back. It's kind of like a little bit of a reunion. It was their town. But when they arrive, they see Astrid. It was hard to miss her. She was majestic, a full sail in black linen. John pulled her into orbit, windmilled his arms comically in greeting. "Where's Stu?" everyone wanted to know. Her face was blank, still. Noting the guarded blur of her gaze, John asked, "Oh, what's the matter?" "Stuart died, John. He's gone." The room went silent, out of focus. A vacuum gathered around them. Beyond the uproar, the announcements, the multitudes hurrying past. Paul and Pete stumbled backward on their heels, unable to check their emotions. They caved into the grief. John, seemingly impervious, had been dealt a sideways blow. He didn't know how to process this news. Death, it took everything he loved. Uncle George, Julia, Now Stuart. His grief was numbing. Nothing registered. And here's where it gets a little sad. George says, in April 1962, Stuart Sutcliffe died. He already left the band. Not long before he died, he showed up in Liverpool in the Pierre Cardin jacket with no collar. He had one before we did. And he went round and hung out with us, almost as if he had a premonition that he wasn't going to see us again. He came to visit me at my house quite apart from when I saw him with the others, and it was a very good feeling that I got from him. I didn't know Stuart was ill, but he was trying to give up smoking. He'd cut his cigarettes into little bits, and every time he fancied a cigarette, he'd smoke just a little piece like a dog end. That's so funny. All the stories make out that somebody kicked him in the head and that he died of a hemorrhage, and I do remember him getting beaten up after a gig once in Liverpool just because he was in a band, but that was a couple of years before. There was something really warm about his return, and in retrospect, I believe he was finishing something because he went back to Hamburg and suffered a brain hemorrhage and died soon after, only a day before we were due to fly back there. I had German measles, so I went a day later than the other guys on a plane with Brian Epstein. That was the first time I'd been in an airplane. We didn't go to the funeral. That was it. As the man said, he not busy being born is busy dying. But we all felt really sad, and I remember feeling the worst for Astrid. She was still coming to the shows and sitting there. I think it made her feel better, at least, to hang out with us. Paul said, none of our contemporaries had died. We were all too young. It was older people that had died. So Stuart's dying was a real shock. And for me, there was a little guilt tinged with it because I'd not been his best friend at times. We ended up good friends, and we'd had a few ding-dongs, partly out of jealousy for John's friendship. We all rather competed for John's friendship, and Stuart, being his mate from art school, had a lot of his time, and we were jealous of that. Also, I was keen to see the group be as good as it could be, so I would make the odd remark, oh, you didn't play that right, but Stuart's death was terrible, because if nothing else, he should have been a great painter. You can see that from his sketchbooks. The rest of us weren't as close to Stu as John was, and they'd been in college together and shared a flat, but we were still close. Everyone was very sad, though the blow was softened by the fact that he'd stayed in Hamburg and we'd gotten used to not being with him. John didn't laugh when he heard Stuart had died, as people have made out, but being young, we didn't go on about it. The kind of questions we'd ask were, I wonder if he'll come back. Among ourselves, we'd had a pact that if one of us were to die, he'd come back and let the others know if there was another side. So as Stuart was the first one to go, we did half expect him to show up. Any pans that rattled in the night could be him. Later, myth would have it that he burst into laughter, but laughter was beyond him. It was enough that he gave voice to a single word. How? Astrid tells him that Stuart's headaches have been getting a lot worse. It was like a bomb going off in his head. Sometimes they would paralyze him to the point of crippling agony. He wrote to his mom that he was afraid that he might be going blind or would go blind. There had been spells where he couldn't see, he couldn't think, and he was kind of falling apart. At one point, he keeled over during class, and it scared the other students because during these moments, he's completely helpless. Sometimes Astrid would be limited in her capacity to sit with him. She would be reduced to stroking a hand or a shoulder while he suffered wave after wave of pain. Other times, she would just hold his head in her lap, scared for his safety. At worst times, she would struggle to hold him down, often with her mother's help, to keep him from endangering himself. At this point, she's like, move in with me. I cannot trust you on your own. They set up the attic studio. This is your perfect place to paint. But even that was dangerous because he'd blacked out and fallen down a flight of stairs. And it was cold upstairs and he was constantly shivering. It's April 10th and it is a day before the Beatles come back to Hamburg. At this point, Astrid is summoned home from work by her mother. Stuart was convulsed with pain, she said, and he needed immediate attention. He has to go to the hospital right now. There was an adamant alarm in her voice. Astrid reacted to it as she might an air raid signal, with fear condensing into swift, definite action. An ambulance already waiting, and without a word, Astrid leapt into the back a moment before it sped away from the curb. Stuart was inside, curled up into a ball. Somehow, Astrid managed to bundle his frail, dish rag body into her arms, and it was there, pressed against her, that Stuart died of a brain aneurysm or other disorder. It would never be certain before they ever reached the hospital.
It was actually John's suggestion. John said, can I see where he used to paint? In that moment, I had to take a picture of them. And John was so full of emotion, being in the same room where his friend was just painting, that he nearly burst out in tears.
The Beatles were stunned, confused. No one that close in age had died so tragically. It was a real shock, especially for John, who looked up to Stu on so many levels. But the Beatles were determined to open in Hamburg on schedule, and even Astrid insisted that they go on the next night, promising to be in the audience as Stu would have wanted it.
And George was all a bit worried, so I just said to George, well, stand behind him. And when you look at the picture and see his eyes, they're so full of protection for John. And John was just falling to bits sitting there, and you could see that in his face.
And it was just absolutely a devastating blow. So anyway, that was fun. So hard left turn. We're going to go talk about the fact effects from the movie and then go watch the movie. It ends sad. Spoiler. I don't know what to say. Sorry. That's what this movie is about. But it's got a little bit of a spin on it.
You can't do your solo spots anymore, Stu.
Why's that?
Because it's shite.
This movie was written by Ian Softly, Michael Thomas, and Stephen Ward. It was produced by Finola Dwyer and Stephen Woolley. The cast includes Cheryl Lee as Astrid Kircher, and you might know her as Laura Palmer from Twin Peaks, Stephen Dorff as Stuart Sutcliffe, Ian Hart as John Lennon, Gary Bakewell as Paul McCartney, Chris O'Neill as George Harrison, Scott Williams as Pete Best, Kai Wiesinger as, it would be, when Ian and I goes walking, the second does the talking, so it would be Kai Wiesinger as Klaus Vormann, Jennifer L. as Cynthia Powell. The cinematography was done by Ian Wilson. It was edited by Martin Walsh. Music by Don Was, or Voss, not quite sure. The production was done by Channel 4 Films and Polygram Filmed Entertainment. It was distributed by Rank Film Distributors in United Kingdom and Senator Film in Germany. It was released April 1st, 1994 in London, in Germany and UK, and it did a limited film release in the US on April 15th. The running time was 100 minutes. Let's see, actually, we're going to sketch back to this part. We're going to go over here. This is an indie film, so I tried to find the budget, but I just didn't. And like I said, this was supposed to be low effort. So I did look, but I didn't dig. I found this interview from the 1994 Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah. It's been reposted from moviemaker.com in 2023. But according to this article and this interview, the budget was $5 million. But the box office, what was made in total was $5.5 million in the combined US, UK, Australia. And also real quick before the other stuff, Universal released a DVD version in 2005 and a Blu-ray version in 2019. It was also adapted into a play. It previewed from September 24th, opened October 10th, 2011, and closed February 16th, 2012. All right. According to an article from The Guardian, Ian Softly said that he came across a photo of Astrid and Stu in the 1980s, and he wanted to learn more about them. He found the photo so intriguing. So the more he learned about Stuart's participation in the Beatles and the story from the Hamburg days, he found that he wanted to tell that story. So he looks up Millie Sutcliffe, which is Stu's mom, in the phone book, and from there he met Pauline, his sister, and Millie and Pauline shared Stu's work and they connected softly with Astrid. Astrid was managing a wine bar in Hamburg and was a little weary of people sniffing around to learn more about the Beatles, but he quickly did connect with her. And this is what Astrid said about it. Not from a Guardian article, different article. I'll put it on screen because I was kind of like iffy about the source here. Astrid says, I was very suspicious, but he sounded very nice, so I met him, and he had a lot of honest enthusiasm about Stuart and his work, says Kircher today from her home in Hamburg. I still wasn't sure if he wanted to put Stuart in front of something just to get a story out about the Beatles, but we kept in contact for about 3 years, and he finally came up with a script, and I saw that I could trust him. He wanted to do a film which was about Stuart and not just something Beatle-ish. When Softly first met Astrid, she brought along Klaus Vormann, and Softly spent 10 days interviewing them and learning more about the story, which became the screenplay. This was in 1988. So he first wrote the screenplay based on these 1988 interviews, but it didn't get anywhere with getting funding. So then he brought in screenwriter Stephen Ward to polish it up, and he wound up completely rewriting the script in 1993. He interviewed Astrid and other major players from the Hamburg era of the Beatles, and this version of the script was greenlit. So back to The Guardian now. The Guardian says that Ian Hart played John, and he read for other potential actors. Hart had played John in The Hours and Times. Softly said, Ian had already played a slightly older Lennon in The Hours and Times, which is a depiction of John and Brian's fun little trip to Spain. They have a kiss in it. I've seen it. I've been told to see it like a bunch of times. It's a film. Just like Harry Styles says, it was a movie, it's a movie. I felt no need to like do a video on it. I was just kind of like, okay, whatever. Softly said, Ian had already played a slightly older Lennon in The Hours and Times, but that wasn't the character I was after. I knew people who had met John in the early days and described him as angry, insecure, and sometimes cruel. It wasn't until I met Ian that I saw he could provide that energy. A lot of people say that Ian looks just like John Lennon, and he doesn't really. It's just that he embodies him so well. Stephen Dorff played Stuart Sutcliffe, and he was super nervous about getting that Liverpool accent correctly, especially since he was auditioning against a lot of English actors. But in a previous film, he played a British kid living in South Africa, and if you know anything about South African accents, boy, those are funky. And he said that he had recently worked with a dialect coach named Julie Adams, so he started working with her again for this and felt that he was prepared, and he said he still uses her tricks now. This article came out in 2024. After he got the part, he spent a few weeks in Liverpool with Ian Hart, who had grown up in Liverpool. So he was able to visit the pubs that the Beatles drank in and John and Stu's old art school. And he says, Ian was my right hand, my brother. He's also a much better guitarist than me. I grew up playing piano, but I was perhaps better at playing bass than Stu might have been. I had to remember occasionally to hit a bum note or fall out of rhythm. Stephen Dorff said that he met Astrid a couple weeks prior to filming, and they both had an emotional reaction. He said, I was still a teenager and wanted to embody whoever I was about to play and to be sure that she believed in what I was doing. We stayed in contact afterwards, and she was very supportive and always watched my movies. He also said that he became close with Pauline Sutcliffe and bought a couple of Stu's original paintings from her. And he was glad that his work was reproduced for the film by artists, and some of whom may have actually studied under the same people as Stu. He was concerned about recreating art in movies and that it would come off a bit hokey, so he asked people what moves he should do just to get in the zone and to, quote, convey his pain and passion in close-up. And Astrid, in that article earlier, says that she was really impressed with Stephen. There were so many similarities with Stephen and the young Stuart that it was very spooky for me. I was 24 when Stuart died, but when a tragedy like that happens, you try to push the sadness away because you are selfish, because you are so young. So really, it did me good to reminisce the memories and the time for myself when this movie came up. Music. Can't talk about the Beatles without talking about the music. Because the movie is based on the early days, there are no Beatles songs as we now know them. So Backbeat features a lot of rock and roll classics that include Twist and Shout, Rock and Roll Music, Long Tall Sally, Please Mr. Postman, and Money. They're live on stage as performed by the Beatles. So they actually put together what was called in the Guardian article a supergroup, which had Dave Pirner from Soul Asylum for Paul McCartney, Greg Dooley of the Afghan Wigs for John Lennon, Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth for guitar, Don Fleming of Gumball for guitar, Mike Mills of R.E.M. bass, Dave Grohl of Nirvana, we know him from a few other things now, drums, Henry Rollins from Black Flag for Stuart. This is from The Guardian. Producer Nick Powell said that he was sitting on the toilet reading a music magazine when he saw the right name for the job. He ran out yelling, "We need to get Don Was," or was, I don't know. Don put together this supergroup: Dave Grohl, Mike Mills, Thurston Moore, Soul Asylum's Dave Pirner, Henry Rollins, and Greg Dooley of the Afghan Wigs. I told Don, don't let them listen to the Beatles versions, just let them kick the crap out of the songs, which I think is really good. It brought a lot of character to the music. And I saw a comment saying that from one of my subscribers saying that they thought the music was a bit grunge, but hey, this was in the early 90s and it kind of fits the time, but also I think it fits the vibe of that Hamburg experience of making it loud, disruptive, crazy. Mach Schau. Something that I do talk quite a bit about while watching the movie and when I go over the movie here in a few minutes is the cinematography and the lighting setup. So this is from that Guardian article. Ian Wilson was a very experienced cinematographer, and for the sequence where the band arrives in Hamburg and drive down the streets near the Reeperbahn, they'd ask the club owners to turn off 1970s and 80s neon signs and leave on the 60s ones instead. Instead, they did the opposite and demanded more money. Ian said, "Get the actors in the van and be ready to go in 15 minutes. Trust me." He got a camera assistant to go around to the clubs and say, "Could you leave the 70s and 80s lights on and the 60 ones off?" Again, they did the opposite of what they were asked, and we got the shots we needed. Isn't that great? Reviews and reception. In 1995, Peter Travers wrote in Rolling Stone that Backbeat's story is a love triangle that makes Backbeat sound like an unholy union of Beatlemania, the movie, and Melrose Place, but the film is audaciously entertaining. He wrote that the movie brings you into the time and place pre-Ringo and the leather days of the Bugs, and he lauds them for creating the movie on an indie budget. Travers says, "What sustains our rooting interest is the actors, especially Ian Hart, who's a knockout as the abrasively funny and insecure Lennon. 2 years ago, Hart played Lennon in Christopher Munch's The Hours and Times, about Lennon's holiday in Spain circa 1963, with the band's homosexual manager, Brian Epstein." Pronunciation: Epstein, pretty much interchangeable. Epstein is actually the way that it was pronounced around the family and inner circle, but Epstein is the way that they did it in the press, because generally Brian thought that that was the more accepted US pronunciation. So now that I know that it was originally Epstein, I say Epstein, but I always get shit for it. I can't win. So anyway, can't win. He's equally uncanny this time about seizing the telling detail. In bed, Sutcliffe in the top bunk, Lennon below. They shag female groupies, but converse only with each other. "How are you finding it here in Hamburg?" Mr. Sutcliffe asks Lennon, interrupting his pal mid-fuck. Hart makes us see that Lennon is less keen on sex with Sutcliffe than on achieving a deeper closeness. Hart infuses the role with romantic longing. Purists may spur Backbeat bashing. The forces that motivate Sutcliffe and Kircher are sketchy and rob the film of resonance, but through his lasting effect on Lennon, Stewart emerges as a prime influence on the Beatles. These were the days when the lads played live and developed the insurgent spirit that they would later ride to glory in the studio. Backbeat catches the Beatles in the act of discovering themselves. It's a thrilling spectacle that rocks the house in a lot of lazy misconceptions about how legends are made. The legendary Roger Ebert, which I'm not saying that you have to agree with him, I'm just saying he's legendary, gives the movie 2 out of 4 stars. He says that there's a lot to the story in the inception of the Beatles, and Backbeat makes the most of it. He introduced the rumors swirling Sutcliffe's death caused by a brain hemorrhage, without getting into the nitty-gritty, which is thoroughly covered in pretty much all Beatles books, but Bob Spitz, I wrote Mark Spitz because you can take the swimmer out of the pool, but you can't take the pool out of the swimmer. Hey, I'm filming.
Okay, did you not want to go see that movie today?
Oh, we can. What time?
There's like a 4:31.
What time is it right now?
4:15.
Oh shit. No, I'll come back. I can finish later.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine. We're gonna go see a movie. I'll come back later. Ugh, shit. All right, I'm back. It's later. So, The Naked Gun, the new one, pretty funny. And I'm not like a comedy person, so it's never a Beatles story without speculation and the salacious story that the all too credible "that is a joke, that is a joke, that is a joke" Albert Goldman, "that is a joke, that is a joke, that is a joke," said John Lennon beat up Stu and caused the brain injury. I should mention that Stu's sister Pauline also espouses this, but in general, the way that Stewart died with a brain hemorrhage from an aneurysm, if it were to be done that way, it's literally impossible because John hadn't seen Stu for 4 months before his death. He wasn't there to cause some sort of inciting incident. That's just not the way that this works. And it's interesting, and it's a fun story to tell at cocktail parties. Do we still call it that? Okay. It's not credible in any way, shape, or form. I do quote Pauline. She seems interesting and fun to talk to at cocktail parties. I have an interview with her, and I'm linking it. I'm not going over it because she says a lot of stuff that I'm like, girl, hang on real quick. Girl, no. Anyway, but let's go back to this. Another story says that Stu got into a pub brawl. And finally, the way that I would put it is that an unknown cause cannot take away from the tragedy of the young talent and beloved man's early demise at the age of 22. That doesn't stop Ebert from criticizing the dialogue for being ham-fisted surrounding this issue. He says, "Whatever caused his death, Sutcliffe died too young to be of enough interest for a biopic, except, of course, that he just missed becoming famous as a Beatle. The irony does not go unremarked by the movie's dialogue, which even has Sutcliffe being told, 'We're going to be big, really big, and you're going to kick yourself for missing out.'" Ebert says that he felt cheated by the story, that there's moments of interest, but mostly an unconvincing portrayal that Stewart could ever really be a part of the success of the Beatles, and I, along with 3 of the Beatles, argue that neither could Pete Best, but that's not really a part of this.
It was almost like we were waiting to get going, and we couldn't go until all the Beatles were in the frame. Ringo was the member of the band. It's just that he didn't enter the film until that particular scene, you know?
And Stuart certainly couldn't be either. I'm so sorry, but it is just the facts. That's the bricks. Them's the bricks, baby. I'm sorry, but the Fab Four was a specific Fab Four, not a specific Fab Five, and Stuart was not a part of it. He'd already left the group before he was gone. Let's not get it twisted. But I think Pauline and maybe a few others like to. And that doesn't take away from Stu's talent or importance as a human or his humanity. Don't do that. It's just stringing together certain things. Just read the interview if you want to know why I'm spicy. Jesus, she's crazy. Okay, Ebert says, well, unless the filmmakers had brought their own imaginations to the material and seen something valid and original in the story of 5 young men in a rock band trying to break loose from the crowd, while one of them thinks he would rather be a painter. This in itself could make a good movie, but only if the story pulled its own weight and didn't hitch a ride on the Beatles legend. And notably, Beatle Paul had some things to say. I'm sure that there will be criticism lobbied toward Paul because he would complain because he wasn't the focus of this film, so of course he has his rub for it. Paul says, one of my annoyances about the film Backbeat is that they've actually taken my rock and rollness off me. They give John the song Long Tall Sally to sing, and he never sang it in his life, but now it's set in cement. It's like the Buddy Holly and Glenn Miller stories. The Buddy Holly story doesn't even mention Norman Petty, and the Glenn Miller story is a sugar-coated version of his life. Now Backbeat has done the same thing to the story of the Beatles. I was quite taken, however, with Stephen Dorff's astonishing performance as Stu. I think that it's a fair criticism to lobby. I haven't seen the movie yet, so I'll tell you how I feel about it. And I know that George did say something about this, but I couldn't find it. I have a comment from a patron, Adam. Hey, let's just take a second for Adam because Adam just beat cancer after 11 years. So my gold passport holder, Adam, for dedicating this video to you. But Adam did mention that George wasn't happy with something about this. I'll just put the comment on screen, but I couldn't find the quote. So I think it's about sex scene. I don't know. We'll get there. What did Adam say? Let's just read it. Fuck it. I was dreaming of the past and my heart was beating fast. In the dream I had with you. It's not a 100% accurate, as you will soon discover, but it has the feel and look of that period quite well. Paul didn't like it as he was portrayed as a bit of a jealous prat, and George was at pains to point out the scene where he stays outside the club lodgings in Hamburg while Stu and John are inside having sex was wrong. If that's in Anthology, I will find it, because you know I will. This was supposed to be a low-effort video, did I mention? So I didn't find George talking about Backbeat, but there is a specific sexual instance that is, I mean, it's very well known in Beatle world, so everyone already knows it, but I'm saving it to include it during the video, during the movie talk through. There's one other Anthology and otherwise clip that's also going to go in through the talk through. Just hold your horses before you're giving in the you missed the blah blah comments. People don't finish the video or don't listen to me because the comments that I get that are like I talk about it in the video, but that's probably just my imposter syndrome. But I have to say, after the George and Paul video, and probably it shows by making a domestic violence video shortly thereafter, something in me kind of changed where I was like, I don't know if I care as much as I used to. But as soon as I say that, I'll probably get all defensive and stupid. So maybe not. Be nice to me. Be nice to me. It's just me. I'm out, you're shitting on me and I'm making this. I'm out here with all these Post-it notes caring about this. See, you have to be nice to me. I'm messing up everywhere. So here is Pete Best's take on this, because Pete does, even though I kind of shat on him a second ago, it doesn't change the fact that Pete was definitely a big part of the Beatles for 2 whole years. He was one of the mainstays of this band. He says, I thought it was a good movie. If I wanted to be very cynical about it, like a lot of people in Beatle lore and Beatle folklore, I could dig holes in it. But at the end of the day, entertainment-wise, it entertained the people. I think the publicity was wrong. The media was publicizing the story of the 5 lads in Hamburg, but everyone knows it was just the love story, the wonderful love story of Astrid Kircher and Stu Sutcliffe, and we were there while this was just going on. But I thought the saving factor was the soundtrack was excellent. I think they worked very hard to capture the sound, the energy we had in those days, but overall, entertainment-wise, yes. And here's Astrid again from that article. She says, but to put my life story and my love story out is very difficult, but I was happy with the actors. I loved Ian Hart, who plays John Lennon, and Stephen Dorff, who plays Stuart. It was easy thinking about Cheryl Lee, who plays me, but I felt much greater responsibility to the characters of John and Stuart because they are not here anymore and couldn't complain. I had to be very careful about that part, putting them in the position they deserve as intelligent and humorous young men who were full of energy and talent. I think, thankfully, that comes through in the movie. Okay, I said Pauline here. Oh, and I guess Julian Lennon liked it. This is from the interview with Pauline. So the interviewer, Gary James, says, when I interviewed Louise Harrison, George's sister, she said it came to a scene where it was supposed to be George and Mom talking. The scene was so far-fetched that it was certainly a conversation that would never have taken place between them. Between that and the color of the lipstick that the guy was wearing, who was supposed to be my brother, I said, well, I've never ever seen him wear that color lipstick. I don't want to waste my time watching this. Okay, Louise. Pop off, I guess. And here's Pauline's answer to that. First of all, I'm the art something or other on this. That movie has just been re-released on DVD. We're talking 1993, 1994. I have met Louise Harrison a number of times in the 90s at these Beatles convention things. I had a book out and I did book signings. Now, anyone who objects to seeing their brother with a bit of makeup on, who is now a pop star, is being very silly indeed, in my opinion. She'd not heard of stage makeup? Honestly, Pauline, even a broken clock, right? She needs to grow up. Hadn't she seen all the photographs of them putting their makeup on in their rooms before they go on stage? What century is she living in, for God's sake? It's actually a very good movie. It's not entirely accurate, but it is a movie. It's not a documentary. It's a very well-made film. Although my involvement was minimal in it, I still think the director did a fabulous job. It's a good movie. If you like movies, it's a great movie. So, I like movies. So let's go see what goes on.
It's all dick.
Exactly.
We're going to be talking about gay. And if you have an issue with gay, I'm so sorry, but gay. All right, I'm non-binary and bisexual, gay. And occasionally, the world, gay. Sweeping warning of gay. I finally slept. I woke up at 8 hours and I was like, no, we can keep sleeping. But I'm not putting on makeup and you can't make me. The only person who really cares is me, I think. Where did my notebook go? All right, let's talk about Backbeat, big dog. Oh, big dog. I appreciate the jokes. You know, if you work from home and you don't interact with other people really, you gotta get your kicks somehow. Okay, we're talking about Backbeat. And I might pick apart the accuracy a little bit, and that's more so in the watch through, but I want to drive home that I don't mean to mansplain anything. It's been kind of my lifeblood to learn about these guys, and I like knowing things, and I like knowing things correctly. I know that that's an absolute shocker. Here we are. So I do pick apart things a little bit, but it's all in good fun. It's not me really saying anything about the quality of the film. I think sometimes I just sound mean. You guys are boring.
Go.
And I'm not mean. Wait, no. This is something that I sent to Abby.
Someone asked me Trixie Mattel Nice. I would say Trixie is a hard worker and Trixie does not. Colleen, I can't.
I love that. Is Trixie Mattel nice? She's a hard worker. I'll take it.
So maybe I am a little mean. Anyway, I had to chop so many of my little flippy edits, which I liked a lot because of copyright. Hey, look at all of these. Holy shit. I can't make Content Daddy happy. I'm sorry, Content Daddy. The movie opens with a black and white kind of jazzy depiction setting with the opening credits. There's a club scene. It looks 1960, late 1950s. We're really seeing that kind of explanation from the review saying, yeah, it really puts you in the moment. It really is setting us up for where we are. There's a bored crowd and almost no one is really paying attention except for John and Stu, who are just having the time of their lives. And it's pissing some people off. A couple of big, scary guys come over and confront them, making fun of Stu's art, and it causes a tiff, if you will. Don't say big dog. But the fight goes crazy and they're running through the back of the stage. It's setting up that they kind of do this sometimes and they don't mind making a scene. It continues out into the alley. And this is something that I read about during not Mark Spitz's book, where they first talk about this fight that happens. John yells. This is something that Ebert talks about, that ham-fisted sort of thing. John yells, "You
fucking kill you!"
You killed him. And John holds Stu. And we're seeing this almost immediate indication of this headache that Stu is going to be dealing with. From blurring of the camera, a little bit of sound design, confusion, disorientation. Then we cut to Stu painting a nude model, and it's not photorealistic at all. She doesn't seem very happy with him, and he seems like kind of, I don't really care about this relationship, if it's a relationship. John walks in, kind of makes a couple jokes, and he convinces Stu to sell one of his paintings. Even though Stu isn't really into bass, or he could have used the money for something else, this is when John convinces Stu to buy a bass. And they get started as a band. The timeline is off, but it's a movie. So we cut immediately to them boarding ship to go to Hamburg. And even then, we see at the docks, Stu is drawing. He's still into the art, and this is where we are introduced to the other Beatles. We see Pete, he's kind of chill and talking about how he hasn't really gone overseas. We see Paul, it's a good Paul. Now, Blake Richardson is the best Paul from Midas Man, but it's a good Paul. And then there's George, who looks nothing like George, but yo, is that supposed to be the ever offensive lipstick? Oh, Louise, you got issues, big dog. As the movie goes on, particularly, sounds a lot like George, and that's not easy to do. We see George's mom, who I pick apart a little bit, but then I find out it's Frida Kelly, so I mean, joke's on me, big dog. John is talking big about how he's the son of a sailor, and then it cuts to him getting seasick. Cut to Alan Williams driving our guys down the Reeperbahn and then St. Pauli district, and they are completely enchanted. They are less so enchanted with their actual lodgings at the Indra in their living quarters. George Harrison now lies about his age, and we see them in their matching suits getting ready to go on. John has that most awkward intro. This is before the Mac Show, but hey, there are girls. Gotta love those girls. Jesus, I wrote so much. I wrote so much. Oh my God. And I don't like this peacock situation with the ponytail. I don't like that. Okay, whatever. I say whatever as I fix it again. Go down. Go down. They're playing, and I think Stu looks a little bit more proficient at the bass than he actually was, which is a nice little narrative boost. Lesley-Ann. Oh, I forgot to mark where I did name him earlier. Just a sec. Obviously, Lesley-Ann wasn't doing the narrative change yet. That came out in the early 2010s. Does that count as another mention? You're obsessed. You need therapy. Tell me something else. Hard cut to John, Stu, and Paul getting laid. John and Stu are talking back and forth, kind of teasing each other. John particularly teasing Stu. This is something narratively that's fun, but it was more so John teasing George. And out in the alleyway is Shy George. This could not be more inaccurate. After George starts getting laid and having his sexual awakening, it is well known and well documented that the most excitable and sexually forward of the Beatles was George. He didn't pussyfoot around. He was getting the pussy. Sorry, big dog. Let's talk about this scene. George vehemently denies that this was him standing outside the back, kind of, I don't want to go in there. He says, in the late 50s in England, it wasn't that easy to get it. This is pretty gross, by the way. I mean, I guess gross depending on who you are, but whatever. The girls would all wear brassieres and corsets, which seemed like reinforced steel. You could never actually get in anywhere. You'd always be breaking your hand trying to undo everything. I can remember parties at Pete Best's house or wherever, and there'd be these all-night parties, and I'd be snogging with some girl and having a hard-on for 8 hours till my groin was aching, not getting any relief relief. That was how it always was. Those weren't the days. But he says, I certainly didn't have a stripper in Hamburg. I know Pete met one. There were young girls in the clubs and we knew a few, but for me, it wasn't some big orgy. My first shag was in Hamburg with Paul and John and Pete Best all watching. We were in bunk beds. They couldn't really see anything because I was under the covers, but after I'd finished, they'd all applauded and cheered. At least they kept quiet whilst I was doing it. Paul says, we kept quiet, kept our faces to the wall and pretended to be asleep. The rest of us were a little more experienced by then. Okay, Paul. George was a late starter. That was the intimacy we had. We would always be walking in on each other and things. I walked in on John and seen a little bottom bobbing up and down with a girl underneath him. It was perfectly normal. You'd go, oh shit, sorry, and back out of the room. It was very teenage. Oh, are you using this room? I want to have a shag, and you'd pull a girl in there. That's why I've always found very strange the theory that John was gay, because over the 15 years of sharing rooms, sharing our lives, not one of us has had an incident to relate of catching John with a boy. I would have thought that that kind of thing would be more prevalent, and John's inhibitions were certainly free when he was drunk. Bisexuality exists. And, you know, if there are girls free, there are girls free. The theory is fair because there's a lot of reasons to believe that John had a swinging sense of sexuality. I mean, it's like seriously extremely normal, but there's also the chance that he wasn't really interested at that time. He had lots of girls and that was fun. And also, you know, that was like safe. If you're experimenting with your sexuality, when any type of non-straight sex or relationship is literally illegal, on top of that, societally frowned upon, considered perverse in all kinds of things, why would you want to do it in a place where your friends could catch you? There's such a big difference between walking in on your friends with a girl and saying, oh shit, sorry. And there's a difference between fucking some guy and having a circle jerk, which is, as far as I understand it, like a little bit more normal than we're acting like it is. Rob Halford's book, they did that too, and they're about the same age. So I don't know. I feel like this is not that abnormal, though my friends and I didn't do that. Though, no, we're not going to say that. Not about my friends and I jacking off. I was just thinking about sexuality, gender, and who can jack off and who can't. All of that being said, let's move on. Then there's this transition scene on stage, and I love this. It shows the guys getting more rowdy, bringing up that beat. They are mock showing all over the place. The girls are dancing and being really sexy. I'm not sure how much I can show on screen, probably very little, but they're looking very nice, and the guys are playing and playing and playing. We're seeing all of this fun stuff, and it shows as time goes by. It is a lovely use of film. And we do see a little bit of John Lennon's aggression. Then Klaus arrives on the scene. He sparks up a conversation with the Beatles, starts talking to Stu. Then we see Paul complaining about Stu. John says he's the best rock and roller out there, and Paul says he's great, he really is.
She's great. She really is all right. They just want to be near each other.
It's just that he does nothing on stage. Then John complains about being tired, and he says it's a hard day's night to Klaus.
I call it a hard fucking day's night.
And I'm over this. There's two moments where they make the hardy har har Beatles jokes, and obviously a hard day's night is a Ringo saying, but I never like that. There's the introduction now to Preludin, Prellies. In Barry Miles' many years from now book about Paul, it says that Astrid introduced, but we've read that it's been introduced by the club promoters. You know, it depends on who you want to believe. I think it was club promoters. Then Astrid and Klaus visit. We obviously know that this is the trio, but it's Astrid and Klaus here, and she's completely taken by the boys, but particularly Stu. And she says, ist sehr schön, which means he is very pretty. They approach the boys afterward and invite them out elsewhere. It's this cool club. It's open-minded. We see boys drinking and kissing, and they take a blue drink. It's like, is this Gatorade? Probably, actually, now that I'm thinking of it. And Pete finally talks.
Drummers don't talk. You must have noticed that.
Right at the docks, Pete finally talks, and he is very contentious. He's angry and saying, you guys never listen to the drummers don't talk. If we're talking timeline-wise in real life, I don't think it was quite this brutal between all of them. And I'm not sure that Pete was this vocal about complaining. It was more so that he just didn't stick around. If they were invited out, he probably wouldn't have gone. Stu is really putting the moves onto Astrid, but it's not really the moves, actually. They're just talking and getting to know each other. Klaus is there, but not really interfering. John doesn't like this, and he starts going off on them. He kind of takes the whole club into a chokehold and just makes an ass out of himself. He's completely out of it, and Paul de-escalates the situation. I love that, because this is kind of what Paul did. Paul accepted every apology that John would give him when he did stuff like this. Paul would take care of the situation, and Stu didn't really know how to handle this the same way that Paul does. Paul says,
time to go home, time to go home. Andy and Teddy are waving goodnight.
Eddie and Andy are saying goodnight. We're getting out of here. Come on, I got him. It's fine. It is just great. Stu goes on to defend them to John. He says John does not care. Now we get to see this really great scene of Astrid taking the photos. Talking about this photo shoot here, Paul says, Jurgen and Astrid would take us to a seedy place like a fairground and photograph us against it. So we started to see how that side of things was done. For a lot of our early hand photographs, we would ask the photographer, can we go out on site? We liked that sort of image. It looks great. Glitter, we always hated. This is really fun because we actually know these photos in real life, and this brings it to life for us. She's smiling while she's getting all of these shots. The boys are having fun, and even though John was very skeptical, if we're being charitable, about this photo shoot before, he's having fun once they're actually in the moment. And then Astrid invites Stu over, and she says, you can see me develop photos. There's always a really nice trick with the light at this point. Stu comes over for a party, and it's gotta have the weirdest introduction I've ever seen. He meets Jurgen. Almost positive it's Jurgen. And I've been saying Jurgen this entire time. So just let it go. Let it go. I don't know what we're doing here with the hair. But anyway, I'm going to be pronouncing Jurgen incorrectly this entire time. And it's really fun and kind of light, and it's showing that Stu is interested in this group of people. He sees the dark room, and he sees Astrid's art and her work, and it's different and dark and sexual. At this point, he asks about Klaus. Is he your boyfriend? And she says,
I've known Klaus all my life. We have been lovers since we were born.
Huh? Big dog. But once he sees the photos of the Beatles, he is so excited. Now we see the boys at Polydor kind of trying to say, hey, we're looking for a record deal. They're showing them the photos, but he is not impressed, and they walk away sort of dejected. We're seeing Stu singing Love Me Tender. Timing could not be worse. The Polydor rep comes in, and just Paul tries to get them to start playing immediately rock and roll music. It is too late. He's already walking off. This is pissing Paul off. He's over it. Paul is mad. He yells at John. He's like, we cannot carry Stu. Then John says, if he goes, I go, which is interesting. I don't think that we actually heard this sort of rebuttal from John in real life, but more so a defense of Stu. He's staying. Not if he goes, I go, but he's staying. Once again, this ham-fisted conversation. Stu walks in on them and says, did somebody die? John is trying to ameliorate both situations, and he revokes Stu's solo bit. Stu walks out, and he has a headache, and it's showing that these headaches are getting more severe. He arrives at Astrid, not really aware as to how he got there, and they go to see a foreign film. Make out, make out, make out. You guys are boring.
Go.
And he's invited again for Astrid to take photos of him, but that makes him late on stage, and John is pissed off. Once again, he's got bad timing because he's agreed to go get these photos with Astrid the next day, but the boys have been picked to do a backing track for Tony Sheridan. It's a big deal. It's the next day. This is the first time that I really hear George Harrison's accent, like, ooh, that was good, woo!
Oh yeah, we'd be quite prepared for that eventuality.
Am I hearing a good George accent again? Am I hearing a good George accent again? Again? Woo! I am shocked, awed, put in a twist. Big dog, I am...
Oh yeah, we'd be quite prepared for that eventuality.
That is a good George. That is a good... George's voice is so hard to nail. Not just the accent, but just the... It's a weird texture. Stu plays hooky. John's unhappy with this, and the boys play My Bonnie. This is great. So they're taking photos. Stu is being really open with Astrid. Cuts to My Bonnie, and the boys are so happy playing. He's loving Astrid. They're loving music. He's loving Astrid. They're loving music. Great touch. Stu admits to Astrid, even though she's already clocked it, that he's not really into this music scene, and he says, I came along for a laugh. And she's like, okay. John will do anything to get a record. So they go back to Astrid's creepy little studio and they fuck and read poetry. Klaus walks in on them together and there's just this really emotional scene and Stu interrupts wearing Klaus's robe. In real life, they remain friends. In the movie, not quite so much. There's a lot of bitterness. When Stu returns that night, the boys are playing sort of acoustically Twist and Shout. And Ringo is in his bunk. This is the only time we see Ringo, but he kind of looks like Ringo. He's a little cuter than Ringo, but the rings are a nice touch. And John is mad again. He says, hey, we've got a spot for the bunk in Ringo. You moved in with the SS. The bunk is open. But he's got some good news. We're going to the top 10 club. I'm a little out of order, I think. Astrid's flat is all black, as we talked about, and Stu says that he wants to paint it red. Or at least have a little bit of red.
Do with a bit of colour in here. Do with a bit of red. I like red. A lot of red.
There's no mention that this is for Klaus, but it would have been a good note to have. That's a nice little bit of jealousy or possession. And we see Stu's studio and how much it contrasts with the boys playing music, these wild shows at the top 10, these great, exciting audiences, and Stu's moment of being able to paint, and he's painting red. John visits Astrid alone, and he is a dick. He's making fun of her for not being quite well read, but she's got all these books, and Astrid is poking into him. You say that you're mad about this, you say that you're mad about that, I think you're jealous. He's like, what, jealous of Stu? And she's like, jealous of me.
I think you're jealous. Jealous? Oh yeah, jealous of who? Jealous of Stu. Jealous of me.
And then Stu walks in on them, and they're about to have this kind of tense moment or moment of recognition, but the Gestapo, the Polizei, interrupt. In all of this moment before they interrupt, Astrid is kind of appealing for friendship. Hey, I want to be friends with you. Later on, they do become friends. The boys are arrested for George Harrison being underage and their work permits are revoked.
Knock, knock.
Astrid and Stu have this really lovely goodbye. It's so sweet. Then this is the dark, isolated times of the boys being separated, and for about 2 weeks, they don't even talk. Then we see Stu and John reconnect first, and he tells John that he's coming back to Hamburg. He's going to get a grant. He's going to have his artwork set up there. He's going to put down anchor in Hamburg with Astrid. This begins the slow-moving resignation of Stu leaving. They talk poems and a poet. John says he's queer, and he talks about bestiality, and Stu says he was possessed.
Sheep, goats.
He was possessed. That's what Astrid said.
So does he mean that he was possessed because of the bestiality or because of being queer? In this moment, John talks about Astrid and says, she thinks I'm queer. She thinks I fancy you.
She thinks I'm queer, Astrid.
Bollocks.
You heard her. She thinks I fancy you.
That's not what she said. What she said was she thinks we love one another.
This is interesting. So we talk about this poet being queer. Having gay sex is fine, but bestiality, not so much. He's possessed. Astrid thinks I'm queer. She thinks I fancy you. Is that the same as bestiality? Is that the same as being possessed? There is so much hanging on being gay. So much hanging on the possibility of fancying someone. Is this just as dark as bestiality? What kind of perverse notion is being gay? George Harrison's 18th birthday, so sweet, and then a Cavern Club show. Very exciting. Beatlemania is kind of beginning in a very small way. Cynthia Lennon's actress is so great, and she did show up. She was so excited, and John, in spite of, you know, getting some with other people, loved having her there. They're back to Hamburg, and there is sex and paint and sex. Stu gets the mop top haircut, and John seems betrayed by this haircut. Stu was trying to brush it back to kind of fit it along with. Once he sees John's reaction, he brushes it forward. There are huge shows. Astrid and Klaus arrive together, and that ticks Stu off. He doesn't want to see them together. He just wants to see her. He storms off the stage and shows up sort of irregularly for shows at this point.
You're a bit flat. Flat? Oh, I'm flat. Me!
Chested. Paul is big mad. Paul is like, I'm done with this guy. I'm done with this guy. I'm done with this guy. And Paul says, what is it with you two?
What is it between you two?
What is it?
Yeah, what's going on?
And then John immediately explodes. He says, are you calling me queer?
Are you saying I'm a queer? Is that what you're saying? Look, you saying I'm a fucking fairy?
It's, my legs are cold, but I didn't want to put on pants.
I got you. No, when I was working on a car, I was like leaned in such a way.
I hate having to chop my work. I've had to do all this ugly stuff to it. It doesn't look good. They're like, hey, don't kill Paul. Nobody's calling you that. It's trying to de-escalate the situation because this is bad. He is very defensive. Later, Stu goes on to say that he's going to quit, and John is pissed off, and he tries to appeal to anger. He's like, she's gonna leave you. You're gonna lose her the way that you got her. She's gonna cheat on you just like she cheated on Klaus with you. And this starts this big squabble between the two. They are fighting up against a wall, and then they are caressing each other. They're holding each other. Their faces are so close together. Are they going to kiss? Just a little kiss? Little kiss? No. I've never had this many issues with a movie, but also my lost videos, they're not so close together in scenes, so that could be one of the reasons that Content Daddy's so mad at me. John breaks away, and there's just this rage and unspoken something. Astrid and Stu go to this really cool party, great makeup, lots of fun. Jürgen is so neat here. And during this, we see Klaus and Astrid make friends. Stu and Klaus make friends. It's going to be okay. Stu's kind of little, so he does the limbo. First round, kicking ass, taking names. Second round, doing good. Very cool camera shots. I haven't said this enough. This movie is so cool. Really great cinematography, really great light design. So, hang on. Guys, be quiet. This is going to be a little bit ridiculous for a second. This little shot, it's a basic shot, and I know that, but one of my favorite shots, period, in Lost. Sorry, I have to talk about Lost for a second. One of my favorite shots, period, in Lost is very similar to this, and it's kind of like this weird...
Previously on Lost.
Hush. The thing about this scene, not that anybody cares, is that it's happening right after this huge moment of disorientation, and they just don't know what the fuck is going on. And it's like suddenly this really streamlined, straight camera angle. Oh, I just love it. I love it so much. So in case you're wondering, this is from season 5, episode 8, La Fleur, and it's right here.
We're screwed. He's probably trying to explain time travel by now.
Wow. It keeps them in the center, but moves them around. Oh, I love it so much.
No more flesh?
It just keeps moving.
No
more flash.
No more flash.
Sound design is so fun because the boys are playing lots of rock and roll music, and a lot of the actual sound design is this jazz. And that was something that the X's were listening to a lot. Rock and roll is brand new, but jazz was the sort of background music at this point, and we're seeing these two worlds clash, collide, and then join. So Stu is going under, he collapses. And it's dark, it's scary. Astrid is afraid at this point, screaming for Klaus. Klaus is afraid. Everyone wants to help him. This is the point where Stu goes to see a doctor. He gets an x-ray and the doctor is kind of like, there's nothing technically wrong with you, but what's going on? Like, are we okay? And
A blow to the head.
always as I'm editing, I'm like, oh, I forgot this, I forgot that, which I guess works because Content Daddy is so mad at me right now. But the thing that I forgot to mention is during that party, and I put it up on screen, but whatever. During that party, they did take pills. And like we said, like Spitz told us, not Mark Spitz, Bob Spitz told us, Stu didn't really do like a lot of drugs, which is fine. But then during this doctor visit right here, the doctor does ask, did you have a blow to the head? And Stu goes, who hasn't? You know? So this is kind of intimating like, did this come from the fight? And, you know, at the beginning when John says, you're killing him during that one fight, this is kind of showing like, this came from the fight. These came from the fight, which medically, that's not really how it would work. It would have been more of an instant thing, but it's not explained in the movie. I think that's a creative liberty. I'm not gonna like, I don't know. My concern, I guess, would be that people would believe specifically that it was from a couple of fights. But, I mean, it's a movie, you know, but then you don't know if, like, people understand that does it really matter? I don't know, man. It's just a movie.
You have had such a blow? Who hasn't?
Stu's saying, maybe it's the speed, maybe it's the drugs. The doctor's like, yeah, that's probably not helping the situation. And which we already know, as talked about in Bob Spitz's book, this wasn't really the biggest issue with Stu. He also says, hey, you're young, slow down. Life is long. Ham-fisted dialogue. Actually, the dialogue of this entire film is actually really on point conversationally from what I know about the Beatles. I think it's done really well. Stu immediately leaves this doctor's appointment and proposes to Astrid. We are going to take a little bit of a break because I feel icky. I'll be back momentarily in like a couple hours probably. Beatles sweatshirt from my mom, yeah. Beatles sweatshirt from my mom, yeah. Beatles sweatshirt from my mom. Yeah. Thanks, Mom. It is too hot to wear this. I just wanted to show it off. It is too hot. Can you imagine how long the Lost video would have been if I wrote this much per hour and 45 minutes? Would have been 7 hours would be nothing. Yes, I'm wearing a different shirt. I got peanut butter over the last one, so I don't want to talk about it. Also, we see that Stu receives the Palazzi grant, so he is good to go regarding his art in Hamburg. So then Cynthia visits. To be extremely clear, just for fun, John and Sin fucked all the time. And John and Cynthia and Stuart and Astrid go to the beach and they build sandcastles. This is one of those photos that we do have of them together. We see Cynthia talking to Astrid and she says all she wants is John and that she just wants to get married and have kids. This is maybe the only accuracy thing that kind of bugs me a day later. This, other than the peacock thing going on with my hair, guys, I'm the only one who cares. I know that I'm the only one who cares. Okay, because Cynthia, I think, let's do it. Fuck it. The misogyny surrounding the baby trapping allegations really bothers me. Not baby trapping, but that, you know, he only married her because he thought it was the right thing, which, yeah, he said that there was nothing else for it, that they had to get married. But Cynthia didn't want to have a baby that young. She said, we never used protection. We just didn't think that, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, you never think it'll happen to you. They didn't think, essentially. Kids, wear condoms. Wear condoms. Take a pill. wear condoms, be careful. If you're not ready to have babies, don't have babies. That's not fair to the baby or to you. And she was like, I had plans for my life. I had a whole brain and I was going to use my whole brain and have plans for my life. And then I became John Lennon's wife. As far as he's all I want, yeah, that was all she wanted when she had a baby. She wanted to have a good, happy family, but that derailed everything in her life. So she wanted kids and a family later. She was in her early 20s. It's very rare, I think, for a kid to want a kid. And it was true for Cynthia back then too. She's not an idiot. That's always really bugged me in the Beatles sphere, and that bugged me here too. Once again, the Cynthia character looks, oh, she's great. Oh, she's great. I swear this is the only thing that I have a real big problem with, because I really actually very much liked this biopic to my own shock.
He's all I've ever wanted. John wants the world.
Astrid seems to know more about John than Cynthia, and that's just not true. Cynthia knew John. I'm not saying she was closer to John than Paul, because that's just not true, but she knew John. And so when Astrid goes, John wants the world, and Cynthia looks heartbroken or whatever. No, Cynthia knew that about him. Cyn knew him. Then we see Astrid and John break into a lighthouse. Very cool. And they have this kind of deep conversation. She says she wants to marry you, or she's going to marry you. And he says, I know, I'm going to marry that girl. And that she's lucky. And he's like, is she? And then very oddly, Astrid's like, so when you're famous and they ask about the German girl that you met, what will you say? And he oddly professes his love to her. Even more inaccurate than the Cyn thing. Spitz got it right. Yeah, he probably wanted to fuck her just like he wanted to fuck everybody, but he didn't love her. And this is really the more accurate thing. Astrid says, I love him, John. I do. And John says, yeah, don't we all? That is the real confession. I said earlier that we're going to talk about gay. This hasn't been as gay as I had expected it to be, frankly, but it is still kind of gay, where it's confusing. You're confused about how you feel about your friends. And frankly, I'm so glad my mom's not watching this. If you're a girl or a femme and you've had a crush on a girlfriend and you're not sure, yes, we're really good friends, but I feel this way, and is she into girls, and what do I do if I'm gonna hit on this girl, and is this real? Should I say something? It's so confusing to date girls. I don't know how straight guys do it. I don't know. It's been so, like, dating girls in my life has been just, I mean, the most confused I've ever been in my life. Am I supposed to say this, and how does it work? And in some cases, not even dating, but like crushing on some of your closest friends. And you're like, where is this worth it thing? Because you want to just be closer. And it's so confusing because you're like, I would be happy to just be your friend because I love being your friend so much. Am I gonna ruin this? How deep are my feelings? It's just so confusing being bisexual. And there's a lot of, you can't decide between genders. No, it's more like, I can't decide if they actually are into this. It's more like that. Bi erasure is really stupid, by the way, because it is so real. Nobody wants to be bisexual. The bis know it, where it's like, this is girl so confusing. You know what I mean? Am I in love with my friend, or do I have a crush on them? Like, am I in love with my friend as my friend, or do I have a crush on them? And my best friend and I joked about this the other day, but it is so true. God or the universe showed up and said, they can't like each other because we like all genders, both of us. They would be too powerful. If we liked each other, it would be insane. We just love each other so much. I think that there's sometimes a friend love that would just far surpass a romantic love. So it's just confusing. And I do think it's really noteworthy that, yeah, don't we all? In my opinion, those are 4 words that really almost encompasses that. At this point, John finally agrees to let Stu leave the band, as if that's a choice that he had anything to do with it.
Play bass a lot better than I can. You can sing a lot better too. Bit flat, you know.
Chested. And they have this conversation. There goes Stu. He could have been part of the Beatles, but he fell in love with a German girl and never really bothered to learn how to play. Oh yeah, wait a minute, Mr. Man. We see Astrid and Stu going and seeing the Beatles play. They're playing Please Mr. Postman, one of my favorite songs of all time. I jammed out to it really hard because it's one of my favorite songs of all time. And then Astrid, in the same vein of when they were saying goodbye on the train, she says, I give you back to the boys just for tonight. So he goes and joins the crowd, and he enjoys the music for the night as a fan, where he would have been anyway. When the band finally leaves Hamburg, they all say goodbye to Stu, and it is such a lovely moment. Paul gives him a hug and says, I didn't mean all that. And Stu says, I never took it personally. Obviously, this is a movie, so we don't see the extent of how difficult things did get and how mean all of the boys, I think it's more John and Paul, became towards Stu. But Stu basically saying, I'm not taking it personally. All good. I'm going to hug it out. We love each other as friends and we're going to move along. When John hugs him, he says, just the most thing is, I'll say hello to Elvis for you. Because we know that happens, but he never gets to tell Stu about it. Stu goes back to his flat with Astrid, and he sees Astrid and Klaus, who are stressing over the building of the Berlin Wall. This is a really scary thing for Germans. We know the end of this. They don't. And they're holding hands. We know the end of this. They don't. And they're holding hands. They're comforting each other. Stu flies into a jealous rage. He starts freaking out. He eventually fights Klaus. He's breaking everything. He's breaking their radiogram. And when he's fighting Klaus, Astrid is trying to pull them apart, and he turns around and he hits her. He runs into the dark room. This is very poignant. He runs into the dark room and he splashes his red paint all over everything. All over the mirror, all over the bathtub, all over the prints. It's this dark room, black, and he's painting it red in rage, not in love. Cut to Astrid and Stu sitting in her car, and Stu apologizes and he says, it wasn't me. And Astrid says, who then? He apologizes, she accepts him. It's kind of intimated. Something is wrong. Then we see Stu painting, but he's painting black, not red. And it looks kind of like there's a disconnect, some sort of darkness. I mean, not to be obvious here. Then the boys are playing the Cavern Club, and it's good. The boys are boarding a plane, and Stu is staring at his canvas, and he looks rough. He looks sick. He's got dark circles under his eyes, and it's not good. And we get that Astrid shows up and says, hey, you got something in the mail, and it is the boys' first single, but they can't play it because he broke the radiogram. At this point, Astrid says that she doesn't want the Beatles to be famous because she's worried that he'll resent her. He says, I'll never resent you. I love you. This is not the way. I was never supposed to be this big. And the world isn't big enough for John. He just had to see past me. Once again, kind of it was a distraction. He thought he needed me. He didn't need me. This is the way. Astrid says, okay, but I have a surprise for you. So she goes in the other room and she starts changing. Interspersed with her changing, getting ready, feeling sexy, and Stu collapsing with this back-breaking headache, and he starts yelling for her, Astrid, and she's like, I'm coming. She shows up, and there's Stu writhing on the floor in pain. She's holding him, and he says, I'm sorry. And then he fully collapses dead. Astrid screams in agony.
I'm sorry.
It's too late, sweetie.
It is a tough scene to watch. She meets up with the Beatles at the airport, and they don't know because it's only happened one day before. John goes and hugs her. She removes her glasses. Her face is somber. And he's like, where's Stu? Where's Stu? What happened? And she said, he's dead. And he hugs her again, and he starts sobbing. John does not laugh. Here's the true story. John goes to Astrid's, and he says, can I see where he painted? They go up. He stands at the studio. He stood where Stu stood. In this moment, there's this ghost of Stu. Astrid sees it. John feels it. At that point, they hug each other. Astrid and John kiss. It's not a romantic kiss. It's a kiss of comfort. And as we know from before, this didn't quite happen. The closest was a friendly hug. And that night at their show, as Astrid told them, Stu would want you to go on. John opens for absent friends, opens with Love Me Tender. and it's very beautiful, and then they break into Twist and Shout. So it's like we will always hold him in our hearts and he'll always be there, but we'll break into good old rock and roll. Love Me Tender breaks into Twist and Shout. Astrid is in the crowd. She's beaming, she's thrilled, she's a fan, and then she eventually retreats and leaves. It's a very special and beautiful moment, but this is untrue. She stayed friends with them until the end of their and her lives. You know, that she was always around. And that includes Ringo. She became friends with Ringo during that time as well. They were all friends. The movie ends with John and Sin and Astrid and Stu on the beach with information on the end of Stu's life and Astrid's photography, and of course the success of the Beatles. It's a good movie. I really typically don't like music biopics. They're usually pretty underwhelming. Though I always I'm like, oh, that doesn't look anything like George. And maybe I would have felt that way more if we saw more of George. It's hard to make somebody look like Pete. Pete was so distinct looking, so I'm not going to get caught up on that. But I agree with what was said earlier. The parts of John that doesn't really look like John, it doesn't matter because he embodies John so well. And I agree with that. And Stu looks like Stu, like straight up looks like Stu. Now, Cheryl Lee doesn't really look like Astrid to me, but she's such a beautiful and engaging actor. She's completely convincing that it really doesn't matter either. Klaus looks nothing like Klaus. We'll let it go. We'll let it slide. It's not really fair because as far as character and all that stuff, Klaus doesn't look like Klaus. He doesn't act like Klaus. The only one that I'm like, that's completely off. I guess other than George standing in the alleyway being like, I would rather die than be in there, you know? I don't even know if it's a complaint because it doesn't really matter. I don't know. Also, the jealousy between Stu and Klaus and all of that, as far as I know, just didn't exist. It was very much a loving friendship and a respectful situation, and losing Stu was hard on Klaus as well. It's not born of accuracy, but it's a movie. The pacing was all right. Cinematography was very good. And in some ways almost reminded me of Giallo films, which, you know, of course it's a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit later in time, but Giallo films are so fun. Always really crazy shots. I feel like tints of that. The kind of more stellar lighting. It seems intentional. It happens more when Stu is getting involved with the X's and all of this stuff. It's more exciting. It's new stuff. It's this whole openness of this whole new world. Whereas the time in the band, in the shows, it's more straightforward shots. Really showing the excitement of the room and how into it the guys are while they're playing. And that is really accurate, but it's not boring. I liked the pacing. I liked the shots. I do see what Ebert was saying about them not having a story there. Yeah, sure, it hitches on the Beatles. But if you're willing to open your mind to just enjoying something a little dramatic, it's a fun film. But I do kind of wonder if I would have liked it as much if it were about a different band. If I would have just been like, okay, so that's it. You know, I get it. But for me, I can't change my mind. I can't undo what I love. So I had a blast. This is kind of a rare moment of me saying, hell yeah, like, go watch it. It was really great. You could rent it. I think it's worth it. It was really fun. And yeah, if you're a big Beatles fan, if you're a big Hamburg area fan, if you're a big Klaus and Astrid fan, you should check it out. And yeah, so this was my low effort video, and I tried. I gave it the good old college try. I really, really did. I promise. Cut back to old Lars. Anyway, please like, subscribe, comment if you're nasty. Consider getting your gold passport, patreon.com/LarsLand. But most importantly, you know that I love y'all so much. And y'all come back now, you hear? Bye. Ooh. Bye. From her diary, she wrote, "There are thousands of people outside. I've counted 10 rows, and each row has more than 100 people in it. And I can only take 60 or 70 children today, but they all need to come." Okay. But they all need to come in. Hell, what a job. How can I decide?
My sweet Lord. My Lord. My Lord. But it takes so long, my Lord. My sweet Lord.
I would like to thank my Gold Passport members, James, Julian, Pete S., Pete L., Jody S., Al, CB, Steve, Caleb, Ann, Kyle, Ship Post Botman, Ashley, Taylor, Russell, Matthew, W. Tyler S., Angel, Front Penny, Debesh, Tim, Dan, Pam, Christopher R., Joe, Alec, Elena, Mad Moonist, Kathy, Charles R., Awkward Yogi, Redlock, Emily, Lola, Kat, McKenna, Sophia, Dan, Dominic, Sam, Rose, Doctea, Donna, Hotel Wi-Fi, nice name, Bernie, Alex, and Clint. Thank you so much for supporting me and indulging my insanity.